Good afternoon, il-wara nofsinhar it-tajjeb u merħba lil kulħadd. We welcome you to this research symposium organized by the Malta Review of Educational Research following the publication of a special issue on the impact of COVID-19 on teaching and learning. I invite Professor Carmel Borg, editor of MRER, and Professor Suzanne Gatt, guest editor of this special issue, to open the symposium and to do their introductions.
Okay, thank you, Rosiane. First of all, good afternoon, everyone. And on behalf of the editorial team of the Malta Review of Educational Research, I welcome you to this online symposium entitled The Impact of COVID-19 on Teaching and Learning. In a way, both the title and the contents of this symposium or seminar mirror a special issue published in December 2020 as volume 14, number 2 of MRER, the Malta Review of Educational Research. I describe this special issue as a very special issue because in a miracle of 6 months, the guest editors managed to produce a voluminous issue. And for those who are not aware what it takes to produce such a volume, I should like to say and take you to the steps of such a production. It starts, generally speaking, with a call for papers. Then obviously the editors wait for people to produce their first draft. Then the first draft goes into review mode. And then the review comes back. It is sent to the original authors. It comes back as a final draft, and then obviously it is edited and type edited until it is published. So it's a long journey until the the issue is published. And thanks to the guest editors of this special issue, namely Professor Suzanne Gatt, Dr. Charmaine Bonello, and Dr. Rosiane Farrugia, they've managed to produce such a volume, as I said, in record time. This is a historical moment for MRER because I believe that this is the first time that this journal in its 14-year history has managed to produce something in real time in response to a phenomenon, in this case, the pandemic. As I said, the issue was published in December last year, 2020. It immediately generated a lot of interest, not only within the academic world and the professional world, but also within the media. We received a lot of good response and good vibes from many people. And one of them was from Professor Ronald Sultana, a colleague of ours, who not only congratulated us on this volume, but also suggested that we should go one step further and showcase the contents and the data generated by this volume to a wider audience. And he suggested this seminar. I obliged immediately, relayed the message to the guest editors who accepted immediately my proposal. And here we are, ready to go for this seminar. Before I pass on the virtual mic to Professor Suzanne Gatt, I would like to thank profusely the guest editors, not only for producing such a volume, but for the cooperation on this seminar. I would also like to thank all the contributors to this special issue. I also want to thank, in the context of this seminar, Dr. Joe Vansell, who is responsible for the technical infrastructure of this seminar. I also want to thank lots of persons who took the task to share the message regarding this seminar on their personal Facebook pages, as well as EGDAM for being such an efficient and effective collaborator on this seminar. Lastly, but definitely very importantly, I should like to thank you, all of you who have registered for the seminars and decided to switch on their view to join us on this seminar. We are really raring to go, so without any further ado, I introduce Professor Suzanne Gatt, one of the guest editors, to share with us some of her reflections on this very particular special issue. Suzanne.
Thank you. It's my pleasure actually to see so many people interested in our special issue. Professor Carmel Borch has already highlighted that I am only one of three of the guest senators, and my colleagues, Dr. Rosian Farrugia, is here chairing the seminar, and Dr. Charmaine Bonello is presenting a piece of work which we did together with colleagues, and really is also related to today's seminar, because uh, our request, our expression of interest to host this special issue was really part of a bigger project where as the Department of Early Childhood and Primary Education within the Faculty of Education, we felt during the school lockdown on COVID that we had to do something to learn about what was happening for the sake of all those children who are receiving an education at this point in time. So, and we put together a research team, which we call the ECHPA team, the Early Childhood and Primary Education Research Team. And we have collected data for our own national level, but we also felt that we needed to share experiences, and we needed also to give a platform to all those researchers, national and international, who were also like us interested on the impact of COVID on teaching and learning. And this is why we decided 3 out of 8. My colleague, Dr. Charmaine Bonello, will talk about, because we presented a paper also about our growth as researchers further on. We felt that this initiative fell well within our remit, and I am so pleased that we have actually had this as one of our first output as a research team. I would like also to thank all the contributors who worked very hard, who submitted very interesting papers, and that is why we are all here today. And for going back and forth with our requests so that the papers are of good quality and standard. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy the information and the research that all the key authors today will be presenting. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne. There are a few important things that I'd like to point out before we actually start. First of all, the event is being recorded. Each paper will be presented by one of the authors. As you can see, the event is packed with presentations, so we will be doing our very best to stick to the times outlined in the program. Each presentation is around 20 minutes long. We will have a 15-minute break at around 5:30. The mics of the audience are automatically muted during the presentations, but you may use the Q&A feature of the webinar to jot down any questions you might have about a presentation. A couple of your questions will be answered during a 5-minute slot dedicated to a discussion as soon as each presentation is over. We have also invited the authors to answer any other questions in writing once they have delivered the presentation. May I also remind you that every paper presented today is available open access on the MRER website, mreronline.org. Now it is time for our first presentation. I invite my colleague and co-author, Dr. Leonard Busuttil, from the Department of Technology and Entrepreneurship Education, Faculty of Education, University of Malta, to deliver a presentation entitled Teachers' Response to the Sudden Shift to Online Learning During COVID-19 Pandemic, Implications for Policy and Practice. Dr. Leonard Busuttil.
Thanks, Rosiane, and good afternoon, everyone. So as
I share the screen.
Yeah, 1 second. There you go. Okay, that will be better.
Yes, good.
So thank you once again, and good afternoon to everyone. As Rosiane kindly explained, I will be presenting this presentation based on the paper, which is available on the MRER journal. So the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and the eventual closing of schools in March 2020 throughout the world caused major disruptions to the education experience of all learners. Teaching and learning began to be organized and delivered from within the homes of educators. This presentation looks at the experiences of teachers in primary and secondary schools in Malta as they rapidly shifted their work to online modes of teaching and learning during the first wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Investment in educational technology has been on the increase in the past years, and we were interested to find out how this increase in investment benefited teachers and learners during the shift to online modes. So the focus of this study is really made up of 3 points: to explore the ways in which Maltese schools responded to the sudden change to online learning within a new educational reality imposed by the pandemic, to capture the voices and experience of teachers working in primary and secondary schools in Malta across the 3 sectors, and to document and gain insights into the circumstances, benefits, and challenges of the shift to remote online instruction as experienced by Maltese educators. Following the research questions which we adopted for this paper were the following: what pedagogic strategies did educators in Malta use during the initial phase of the COVID-19 pandemic? How was the technology used in schools during the first phase of the pandemic, and how confident did the teachers feel using this mode of teaching and learning? And finally, what support systems and collaborative efforts amongst all stakeholders involved enabled or hindered the teaching and learning process during the initial phase of the COVID-19 for learners living in Malta? We adopted the following research methods. We distributed online questionnaires through social media. The questionnaires were made up of open and close-ended questions, and we received a total of 407 responses from primary and secondary teachers. Python was used to analyze the quantitative data, whilst thematic analysis was used to analyze the responses to the open-ended questions. So what follows now is a summary of the findings. Out of 407 respondents, only 19, that is about 5%, stated that this was not their first experience teaching online. 35% of the teacher participants confirmed that they had previously received training that helped them navigate the new COVID-19 scenario. However, the majority of the respondents found themselves in a completely new territory with qualitative data showing the participants' diverse experiences. Only 11.6% or 47 of the respondents stated that the amount of time dedicated to their teaching role had not increased during the pandemic. A high percentage of respondents commented on the substantial amount of hours required for evaluating, creating, or recording resources. Excerpts from the open-ended questions summarize the feeling of the teacher respondents, highlighting not only the time that went into the organization and running of sessions, but also the conflict between the different roles that the parent teachers had to conduct during the pandemic. 72.7% of all the participating teachers stated that they used only real-time communication tools with students, with the rest opting for asynchronous modes of teaching and learning. The highest percentage of teachers using real-time online teaching was reported for those working in secondary schools, followed by teachers teaching upper primary, and then those teaching year 1 to year 3 classes. The most popular tool or platform used in schools was Microsoft Teams, being used by about 40.5% of the participants, followed by Zoom, used by 11.1%. Some of the participants used a combination of 2 or more tools, depending on the purpose of the communication or session. 41.6% of the teachers recorded their online sessions for students who could not join the real-time slot, increasing the chance for more students to access learning. Only 14% of real-time online users pointed out that they ask students from different groups or classes to join the same real-time session. There were countless strategies and approaches used by some teachers to implement remote online teaching effectively. Some participants used existing online resources, whilst also creating new ones that are tailor-made for the needs of their class. Existing material was adapted to make it accessible to all students by adding more detail and information or breaking it down into smaller chunks, particularly for those who may struggle to grasp concepts. Some teachers recorded videos with voiceovers, explanations, or instructions aimed at students and sometimes their parents too. Only slightly less than half of the participating teachers felt that they had adequate skills to produce audio videos resources, which prompts questions on the level of preparedness and the teacher digital competencies as teacher self-efficacy and confidence. Surprisingly, only 2/3 of 93 respondent teachers teaching years 4 to 6 mentioned that they encouraged their students to use their school tablets during online sessions. The rest preferred not to use them despite the huge investment done. Teacher participants mentioned several factors that influence their preference for not using tablets. These range from tablets being seen as inadequate or inappropriate for remote online teaching, technical glitches, children's lack of confidence with the use of digital technologies, and use of school portals on other devices preferred by students and parents. Those who did use tablets mentioned that they uploaded quizzes, interactive games, and links to YouTube videos for the students to use. The students were then asked to take a picture of the work done and send. Less than half of the respondents, 45.5%, stated that they collaborated with other teachers when creating resources for online teaching. Multiple reasons were noted for the tendency to work alone, as opposed to collaborating with others. Being the only teacher teaching a particular year group or subject area, lack of time for collaboration, different pedagogical approaches, and unsupportive environments were listed as reasons for minimal collaborations with other educators. Teachers voiced their concern about the kind of support that was provided, expressing both gratitude towards those who were contributing positively and disappointment at others who were not supportive. One of the prevalent views expressed by the teacher respondents was that remote teaching during the time of the pandemic brought the teachers working in closer contact with parents. Teachers made considerations relating to accommodating family schedules when selecting an approach or strategy to adopt. For instance, some believed that asynchronous modes were more effective in increasing the likelihood that a wider pool of learners have access to learning, particularly in homes with working parents and/or households with more than one child. Supportive families made it easier for teacher respondents to feel valued, less stressed, as well as effective in addressing and meeting individual learner needs. Whereas a sense of resignation and deep concern for a child's development and well-being was evident in situations where parents were not involved, either due to work commitments or an inability to use technology, a lack of interest in their child's education, or other family issues. Some teacher participants also experienced the lack of appreciation and increasingly unreasonable expectations, which added pressure and stress to an already strenuous situation. Various benefits and challenges experienced as a result of the sudden shift to remote online learning transpired through the data, pointing to the opportunities as well as the difficulties that inevitably arose. Amongst the positive outcomes that emerged, teacher respondents identified teacher empowerment and confidence, collegiality, and appreciation of the teacher's role and work by families and society at large, which in turn was felt to have led to a stronger link between the home and school in some instances. Online assistance by both technical staff and supportive leaders was also mentioned. Teacher respondents also experienced a broadening of their own knowledge and competence with digital technologies, with increased familiarity with synchronous and asynchronous approaches that resulted from the emergency situation. Conversely, multiple negative consequences were evident, with participants highlighting the lack of preparedness and adequate training or support, particularly at departmental level rather than school level, as well as increased demands at their time and blurred boundaries between work and family life.
Just a reminder that you have 5 minutes, Len.
Okay.
Thank you.
Particularly concern was the impact of COVID-19 emergency situation on the learner's academic and psychosocial development, and the fear that the gaps in outcomes and opportunities for the disadvantaged students would be widened rather than reduced. Another negative consequence was frequently mentioned by teachers was how the shift to remote teaching drastically transformed their daily lives and the ways in which they conducted their professional role as educators. A substantial number of teachers, 192 out of 296, responded that they used the real-time mode to contact students, noted that not every student was able to join real-time sessions due to technical issues on the student side. These technical issues included problems with internet connectivity and unavailability of digital technologies and devices. Software limitations to connect to the whole class was cited by 13.9% of the teachers. Student engagement seems to have suffered during the real-time online sessions, with 59% of teacher respondents stating that students were not as engaged as they would have been in the physical class. Overall, there was also issues with absenteeism during online sessions, particularly for secondary student respondents. A large majority pointed out that students did not provide a reason for not joining a session. In conclusion, in recent years, efforts to modernize underlying educational provision with changing societal and occupational needs and circumstances were translated to a push for an increase in the use of digital technologies and for blended and more innovative modes of teaching and learning that are technologically mediated. In normal circumstances, a similarly conceived educational shift in mindset takes place gradually and strategically to ensure optimal planning, training, and delivery of widespread learning experiences. A pandemic, however, does not wait for countries or education authorities to prepare themselves adequately for new ways of living and learning. Undoubtedly, no one envisaged an abrupt and total shift to remote online instruction modes on such large and international scales. Overall, teacher participant response to the sudden shift to remote online teaching was largely dependent on the availability of suitable platforms and tools, prior and emergency training, existing support systems, digital skills, teacher beliefs and confidence with technology, age of learners, as well as their personal and family situations. Prior investment and funding in technology by the Maltese authorities proved to be, to a large degree, ineffective in the face of a calamity, such as a pandemic. Teacher participants highlighted the shortage of adequate technology and technological devices, both from their own and the learner's end. Moreover, there was also a general impression of a shifting of goalposts for Maltese teachers, whose prior and recent training and professional development did not prepare them for a more sophisticated set of competencies required to tackle technology-mediated learning. The diversity in digital solutions adopted by different teachers and schools pointed to the need for a more strategic and consistent approach within and across schools. The study also signaled the dire need for Maltese educators to be guided by a formal digital competency framework to be at par with other European member states. Initial teacher training and continuous professional development will need to be renewed in view of the likelihood of future emergencies. Findings indicate that more advanced digital skills for remote online teaching that is pedagogically sound, innovative, and sustainable are required to effectively address the 21st century skills. Investment and funding on technology-mediated learning must be matched by adequate high-level training that is needs and interest-based, giving teachers and educators a voice and a say in determining what kind and mode of training to attend. The current study also highlighted the salience of an education culture of collaboration, cooperation, and reliable support systems to all levels for successful educational practice. The findings pointed to the need to prioritize the overall well-being of children and adolescents, their families, and their teachers when policies are devised and implemented. Parental involvement cannot be kept on the periphery or done superficially in circumstances where it was evident that cooperation and participation became indispensable as much as it was undisputed. An investigation of the current levels of attainment for all learners with a focus on identifying strengths as well as gaps in learning on areas that need to be addressed is called for to counteract or mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on the learning of a whole generation of children and adolescents. Finally, the current study just provides a snapshot of the Maltese teachers' response. We need to also conduct further research to see the impact of the emergency transition on the voices of parents, learners, and leaders.
Thank you, Len.
Thanks.
We have two questions. One about the ratio of state versus non-state respondents in our study, as well as on the fact where you spoke about the huge investment done in terms of technology, particularly tablets. In the light of this knowledge, sort of what are the lessons that we can learn in terms of teacher training when it comes to the use of tablets and other technology to teachers' use of technology in class?
Okay, thanks. These are very good questions. As I said during the beginning part of this, the start of this presentation, the way we distributed the questionnaires was done via social media. So we relied on teachers to respond. The replies of these questionnaires is more biased towards teachers teaching in church schools. If you want the exact figures, I can write them later in the chat. When it comes to the investment in technology, it's not just the tablets that we need to look at. The investment in technology was done to connect schools to the internet, which remained mostly unused because teachers had to rely on their home connection and not the school connection, as well as investment in things like interactive whiteboards, which again could not be used, as well as digital toys, which are used in class, which the students interact with. That kind of investment could not actually be made use of during the pandemic. We were surprised that the tablets were not used as much as we thought they would be. We thought that since the tablets are available for all students in year 4 to year 6, they would be used a lot during the online teaching in the pandemic. However, they were not. And this, the person asking the question is correct. We need to reflect upon and also look at how we need to change the way teacher training and CPD happens on the use of tablets. Tablets must be more ingrained in the life of the classroom so that when instances like this occur, they would be actually used and not be put aside towards, and we shift towards using other forms of web platforms.
Thank you, Leonard. Now you can stop sharing the presentation so that thank you.
Thanks.
We move on, thank you. We move on to our second presentation. I invite Dr. Jane Spiteri from the Department of Early Childhood and Primary Education, Faculty of Education, University of Malta, to present her paper called Assessing the Usefulness of Outdoor Learning in the Early Years During the COVID-19 Pandemic in Malta. You can share your screen, Jay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, so hello everyone. My paper was regarding assessing the usefulness of outdoor learning in early childhood during the COVID pandemic in Malta. And for this opportunity to publish, I would like to thank Professor Khan Borch and the editors of this journal, Dr. Farrugia, Dr. Bonello, and Professor Gatt, and the anonymous reviewers as well. I have special interest in outdoor learning, and unfortunately, from my doctoral research, I realized that outdoor learning, I apologize, outdoor learning is not mainstream in Malta. So having been reading some literature, international literature, and looking at what was going on internationally in terms of schools reopening after lockdowns in other countries, I became interested in exploring this field of research in Malta. Obviously, the pandemic has brought along a lot of uncertainties in education as well as in other sectors of our lives. And this research started from the assumptions about young children's possible vulnerabilities and their role in disease spreading, which was very prominent during this pandemic. You know, they were labeled the super spreaders. And this has led to school closures in many countries, including in Malta in March, so a year ago. School closures resulted, unfortunately, in a lot of learning losses, especially for vulnerable children who do not have support at home. And these are likely to impact their educational and financial outcomes in the future. So outdoor learning has been proposed in the early years. It's not something new. It's been proposed for a long time, since you can go back to Plato and Aristotle and other early childhood education theorists like Rousseau, Locke, Dewey, Froebel, and Pestalozzi, and they all proposed outdoor learning as a way of learning in the early years. It's not the only way, of course. It is one of the ways of learning. And research in recent years has shown us that nature offers a lot of sensory experiences to children and materials which are naturally available in nature, which they can use to enhance their development. And before I move any further, I would like to provide a definition of outdoor learning. In the literature, usually we find two terms which are used interchangeably, and these are outdoor learning and outdoor education. However, these traditionally meant that learning happened in residential centers. So if you go back to the earlier literature, we would see that this kind of learning happened in residential centers, and we had quite a few of them in Malta back in the day. Maybe now they're not used as often as they used to be. So, or as children are taken out on school visits to remote settings. However, this is not necessarily the case because, as we will see, outdoor learning can happen in many contexts. So we can start with the school grounds, closest proximity to the children. We can move on to conduct outdoor learning in the local neighborhood, or else we can go out on field trips, as this diagram is showing, or else we can even extend it to overnight stays or residential expeditions. I've experienced this myself when I was in school, and it was an experience I'll never forget. So, and hence my interest in this area. The purpose of my paper was to explore the benefits of outdoor learning in early childhood education in Malta, and then to make recommendations for more opportunities for outdoor learning in the early years, but not only in Malta. Okay, so the purpose first. My purpose was first, which was a pedagogical point, where I wanted to explore how the COVID-19 pandemic can be useful in introducing these creative forms of learning in the Maltese education system. And second, it was a political point, where outdoor learning can make valuable contributions to ECE, early childhood education in particular, and the Maltese education system in general, that, in my opinion, requires a rethink of the pedagogies adopted by educators in light of what happened as a result of this pandemic. So when I say political, I don't mean political in the sense of the binary divisions in Malta, but political in the sense that it requires a rethink. It requires us to think and think things through. In order to find out and to reach my purpose, I used a systematic review analysis using the Prisma flowchart. I used 7 databases, which are the SpringerLink, Greenfile, Education Resources Information Center, Education Source, Science Direct, academic search complete and humanities international complete. Then I use the words, the search words and or, using terms like early childhood education, school, outdoor learning, outdoor education, COVID, SARS-CoV-2, learning outside the classroom, outdoor learning, etc., or coronavirus. These are the terms most commonly used in the realm of outdoor learning or outdoor education. This search resulted in 79 recordings. I went through the titles, the abstract, and then the full text. All of these studies were in English, of course, which is the academic language mostly used. And after filtering them out, they returned 51 articles. Obviously, this methodology, the data extraction for these articles, they were selected on the basis of whether they focused on the parameters within this review, if they were deemed to be robust enough to answer the research questions, and if their methodology was clear and justified and the analysis were robust enough. Obviously, like any other study, these also had limitations. And the first limitation was that I was able to include only articles written in English, which were obviously peer-reviewed. There were other articles written in other languages, which I couldn't include, obviously, because I don't speak those languages. There was other material which could have also been useful, but was written in other languages, so that was excluded. And the search parameters and the terminology used may have also excluded any other specialist publications in other disciplines. So those are the limitations of my studies. Then I'm going to present to you the findings and discussion together, okay? So the results was, the papers, were analyzed thematically, and these are the themes which emerged, which are school closure, children's well-being, outdoor learning during the pandemic, outdoor education in Malta, health and safety, and overcoming challenges of outdoor learning. So school closures, there's been a lot of research on school closure and the impact it had on young children and even older children. The idea of closing schools during a pandemic dates back to the 1918 influenza pandemic, when they realized that by closing schools, they could control the spread of the infection. So now that we have another pandemic, they decided to close schools. However, more recent research indicates that there is only moderate effectiveness to school closure in minimizing the spread of the virus. So whereas in 1918, this was very effective, nowadays the effectiveness is more moderate. It's around 15% according to the literature. So the effectiveness of school closure on the spread of the coronavirus is about 15%, which is quite low. So following school closure, there was a transition from face-to-face learning to online learning. However, recently, OMAP, which is the International Organization for Early Childhood Education, suggested that online learning in the early years needs to be minimized because of the possible harm it could pose to young children. In fact, there seems to be a correlation between children's increased use of online platforms and their risks to online threats, such as, for example, these include exposure to inappropriate content, exploitation, etc., particularly where parents or caregivers or guardians are absent during the time when the children are online. So if not properly implemented, online teaching and learning in the early years might even exacerbate the inequalities, especially for disadvantaged children, for all children, but disadvantaged children may lack the resources and the support, making their learning losses even more amplified. The pandemic and school closure also had an impact on children's well-being. Research shows that the pandemic is very stressful for children and adults, and it has impacted their mental health. And it has also further amplified any existing mental health issues that there might have been. So it has hit children really hard. So outdoor learning during the pandemic, so play and movement, which are common characteristics of early childhood education, are an essential part of learning in the early years, especially during the pandemic. The COVID-19 pandemic has brought trauma to humanity all over the world, including children. So the outdoors could provide the therapy needed to calm children down as an antidote to the stress and anxiety. Research shows that taking children outside, movement, being outdoors in nature, is very therapeutic to children, especially during the pandemic. So outdoor learning is a viable option to provide learning opportunities for young children to learn in meaningful ways while having fun. If we look at, for example, the Nordic model, where they started schools before we did, in fact, they started schools by taking children outside a lot. And also there is less risk of contracting the coronavirus when they are outside than when they are inside, obviously, because there's air, there is more space, and they can spread out even more.
Jane, just a reminder that you have 4 more minutes left.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you. So outdoor education is not mainstream in Malta, which means that from my own research, I found out that teachers find it sometimes difficult to implement because they either feel insecure or because they are afraid that children might get hurt. However, this raises issues of power and control and our image of the child, actually. Okay, so in order to implement it properly, obviously, we need to look at health and safety. Taking children outside can pose certain risks, but if teachers are aware of those risks, they can safely take children outside. So first of all, teachers need to prepare children that they're going to go outside. We're going to be physically distanced. We're going to follow the 2 meters distance, hand hygiene. We're going to use face coverings just as well. Okay, and it should be all right. So in order to overcome these challenges, we need to prepare children emotionally, socially, and intellectually in order to conduct safe learning experiences outdoors. So it is important that educators monitor for dangerous behavior outside. They make sure that children know the safety rules before they are taken outside, and those are clearly explained to the children. And also, once teachers and children get used to these ideas, they can make new discoveries and investigations and explore the environment, the outdoor environment, in a safe and effective way. Okay. However, of course, this requires well-trained teachers who are, I am sure that many teachers are enthusiastic and caring educators. However, research shows that for teachers to conduct effective outdoor learning, they need training. So in that area, we need further research within the Maltese context of related to teachers taking young children outside, especially now during the pandemic, to learn in different contexts. Okay, thank you. That was it from me for today. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jane Spiteri, for an insightful presentation. Yes, we have a question here. So we've heard about minimizing perhaps the use of online and go more towards the play and meaningful and outdoor. However, we've also heard through the previous presentation that online is strengthening the partnerships between parents and educators of having children using technology and digital, becoming digital citizens. How do you see this, Jane, from your research?
Well, from my research, I really believe that from what the data show, that it is very effective. In fact, right now during the pandemic in northern countries, there is research going on with young children using technology, both indoors and outdoors, and how this can come across in order to help children become these digital citizens, which we need nowadays. And it's proven to be very, very effective. And I would like to make a point here, if you allow me, Dr. Bonello, because I read one of the comments. When I said that nature is therapeutic, by no means am I saying that I am a therapist or I intend to be a therapist. What I said was that research shows that nature can be therapeutic to children. So I'm not in any way doing any psychological analysis here or trying to psychologically assess anyone. I'm just relating to you what the research says. So I would really like to clarify that. And also, my research was not psychological research. It was a systematic literature review. So I was simply discussing the findings from the systematic literature review. I hope I was clear in that regard.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Speter. You can stop sharing your screen now, please.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. And I'll pass on to the floor to Dr. Farrugia.
Thank you, Dr. Jane and Dr. Charmaine. It is now time for our third presentation, which will be delivered by Professor Rosa Valls from the Department of Theory and History of Education at the University of Barcelona. The title of the paper she co-authored with Ana Toledo and Sara Gomez is The Benefits of Participating in Virtual Learning Spaces for Adults Overcoming Isolation during COVID-19. Dr. Mimar Ramis has kindly accepted to act as interpreter. Thank you. You may share the screen.
Okay, thank you very much, Rosine. My presentation, my colleague Mimar Ramis hace la traducción por mí. Mimar, ¿vos presentar?
Yes, my name is Mimar Ramis. I'm a professor colleague of Rosa Valls at the University of Barcelona, and I will be assisting in translation.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, en primer lugar, por habernos hecho el encargo y poder participar en este special issue tan importante en los momentos que vivimos.
Thank you very much for having commissioned us with this important task, especially in these difficult and complex times we're living now.
La investigación que vamos a presentar se titula Los beneficios de participar en espacios virtuales del aprendizaje de personas adultas que superan el aislamiento durante esta situación de COVID.
Yes, the presentation we are going to share with you today is titled, as you see here, The Benefits of Participating in Virtual Learning Spaces and in Situations of COVID in the adult school.
El objetivo que teníamos al hacer esta investigación era aportar conocimientos de si la pandemia, el COVID, había traído beneficios a las personas que sobre todo participaban en la educación de personas adultas.
The goal we had was to be able to find out whether COVID somehow brought some benefit, especially to those who are into adult education.
El estudio lo realizamos en una escuela, la Escuela de Personas Adultas de la Verneda San Martí, que es un referente a nivel internacional y español de educación de personas adultas.
The research was done in Adult School of La Verneda San Martí, as you see in the slide, which is a landmark known internationally as well as nationally for adult education.
El estudio fue un estudio cualitativo porque, como decíamos, queríamos ver si había mejorado la participación, no tanto si había más o menos, sino si había mejorado la participación y si había influenciado en las personas en su aislamiento, soledad.
The research was a qualitative one because what we wanted to see was not as much that if participation had increased, but rather if it had improved, if it had suffered any improvement, and also if it had had an impact on the isolation of participants.
En la literatura científica encontramos mucha investigación. Toda la comunidad científica creo que se ha movido en investigar en esta situación que estamos, y por citar dos referencias que hay en el estudio, nos podemos encontrar pues como la UNESCO, ¿no?, nos estaba advirtiendo ya de que la interrupción de las escuelas, tanto de primaria y secundaria, pero también de educación de personas adultas, ¿no?, iba a producir tasas de abandono, etcétera. Pero, perdón.
Yes, the literature has been very interesting in this issue because all the scientific community has really been focused on finding results and about COVID-19 challenges. And Professor Weiss is highlighting two references that are included in the study, like we see here the UNESCO, and mentioning how the impact and the consequences on abandonment and other impacts of interrupting schools, like actually has been said.
Pero al mismo tiempo también había investigaciones como el estudio de la OCDE, ¿no?, en la cual decía que nos podía aportar muchos beneficios, ¿no?, por la implementación de las nuevas tecnologías, pero también por innovar educativamente.
At the same time, there were other studies like this one from OCDE about how that the COVID-19 was also bringing about benefits, both in the use of IT technology in general in education, but also as an opportunity for innovation.
Solo para una situación dentro del estado de la cuestión, en España nos situamos con un índice de envejecimiento bastante mayor, de un 127%, 125,79%, y al mismo tiempo estamos viendo que en el curso 19, que aún no estábamos con la pandemia, la educación de personas adultas, según la edad, iba descendiendo. Es un tema que estamos trabajando a fondo en España para que haya más participación en la educación de personas adultas.
An important issue that he wants to highlight is the fact that Spain has reached, as you can see here, an aging index very high, 125.79%. But at the same time, participation in adult education is decreasing. So that is a subject that we are investigating in depth in order to promote higher participation rates of adults.
En relación al aislamiento o a la soledad no deseada, también encontramos muchas investigaciones que desde luego nos están desde hace tiempo ya demostrando que este aislamiento no está ligado a un empeoramiento de la salud, ¿no? En general.
Important findings are highlighting the fact that isolation and unwanted loneliness in the elderly is having a negative impact in health issues in general.
Pero al mismo tiempo, la investigación también nos aporta evidencias de que hay intervenciones efectivas, educativas, que pueden contribuir a que este aislamiento no sea así, sino que pueda mejorar la salud de las personas.
There is also other types of research bringing about results about how special educational actions are effective in making that this isolation doesn't have this negative impact.
Para ello, optamos con una metodología, como decíamos antes, cualitativa, porque no pretendíamos generalizar los resultados, sino obtener información, una información cualitativa, ¿no? Y para ello era una selección informal de sujetos voluntarios que nos aportaban esta información que buscábamos.
Methodology was done through an informal selection of informants that were with readiness to answer to the questions that we were looking for, that were basically qualitative.
Para ello, como decíamos antes, hizo un estudio de caso en la Escuela de la Verneda, que antes no lo he dicho, que tienen 1.600 participantes de educación de personas adultas. Comentábamos antes que era referente mundial. Ellos han tenido muchísimas visitas de todo el mundo, pero aquí tienen algunas citas en las cuales ustedes pueden leer, tanto de Sean Cummings, de Adult Learning and Literacy, de la Harvard Education, como de la Carol Lee, expresidenta de la Asociación Americana de Investigación Educativa.
The investigation was done in the Adult Education School of La Verneda, which was the case study, and this is a school with over 1,600 participants, which was not said before. And Dr. Weiss highlights the fact that there has been many academics from all over the world visiting and studying this adult education school. And here you can see quotes from two of them, Professor John Cummings from Harvard University and Professor Carol Lee, former vice president, from the American Educational Research Association.
En la metodología que realizamos, una metodología comunicativa en la cual tenemos en cuenta los sistemas, ¿no?, y el mundo de la vida, conforme la participación de los investigadores conjuntamente con las personas investigamos, creamos, ¿no?, la co-creación que ya, como todos ustedes saben, ya nos la piden en los próximos programas del Horizon Europe. Para ello hubo 7 entrevistas semiestructuradas.
Okay, following the communicative methodology, this methodology combines both the world of the systems and the live world, where the systems, where the researchers, bring about scientific knowledge and people from their knowledge of the situation, and together they create new knowledge through this process of co-creation that is already requested actually from Horizon Europe, the European Framework Program of Research. And in this framework, there were 7 interviews with people with these ages conducted.
El análisis del estudio, ¿no?, tuvo en cuenta las diferentes categorías que queríamos averiguar, como la participación y todo el tema de soledad, con sus diferentes subcategorías, teniendo en cuenta sobre todo las dimensiones exclusoras y transformadoras.
Following the communicative methodology, the categories were distributed into exclusionary and transformative dimensions, and then the subcategories also focusing, of course, on what the concept of the research was, that is participation and isolation.
¿Qué resultados llegamos? Pues muy interesantes, aquí pueden tener, en el artículo podrán ver algunos más, ¿no? Y nos encontramos temas como María Ángeles, en este caso, que nos dice y nos afirma, dice, mira, a veces he participado en la escuela más que antes, cada día más, le dije a un compañero, nos vemos más. O sea, una participante que nos está planteando que a través de online se ve mucho más que antes.
Some of the results you can see here that we are highlighting, and the others you can read in the paper. Here, the first one highlights the fact that through online participation, they see each other more. And here you have the literal quote of this participant called Ángeles that actually remarks how the online participation brings her closer to her fellow participants.
Y además también han aprendido a conectarse online, y lo que dicen es que esto tendría que continuar porque muchas personas que cuando son muy mayores, para ellas puede ser que muy mayores sean 90, 90 y pico, sería una forma de que como ahora no se pueden mover de casa, pues que esto continuara después de la pandemia.
And they also were saying that this should continue because for other people who are becoming very old, and for this participant very old means 90 or over 90, would be a way to keep connected and with the fellow participants, because sometimes they cannot move anymore, participate like going physically to the place.
En relación al tema de la soledad, ¿no? También los mismos participantes en la investigación, a través de los programas que ofrece la escuela, nos dicen que se sintieron acompañados, ¿no?
Participants told us that through the different programs that the school put into practice during this time, they really felt very well accompanied, followed up.
Por ejemplo, Abbas, que en los momentos de la pandemia estaba en el hospital, estaba esperando la conexión, porque estaba solo en el hospital, no tenía compañía, su única conexión era a través del ordenador con sus compañeros.
For instance, this one you see in the screen, Abbas, that during this period in the pandemic, he was in hospital, and for him, this was the only connection he had because he was alone. So he was really looking forward to the moment of the connection to meet with the fellow participants, the mates from the class.
O Rosario, que a partir de la pantalla ha conocido a nuevas personas que espera volverse a encontrar luego por su barrio.
Or also Rosario, who through the screen, through the online connection, has met new people that she is really looking forward now meeting physically in her neighborhood.
Como conclusión, que todos ustedes sabemos, los que disfrutamos con la educación de personas adultas, es que nunca es demasiado tarde para aprender, quieren aprender y seguirán aprendiendo.
As a conclusion that I'm sure it is shared with all of us here who enjoy very much with adult education, the conclusion is that it is never too late to learn, that they really enjoy learning and they want to continue learning.
Y que el aprendizaje virtual, que han aprendido más, que muchos ya sabían, algunos lo han aprendido ahora, les puede contribuir a mejorar su soledad.
And that online learning, some of them have learned this now, others have continued learning, but that online learning is improving their learning, but also their loneliness. And I think, thank you, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Roosevelt, we have a couple of questions. One is about the methodology. You mentioned the communicative methodology. How did this sort of help you to gather the kind of data you were looking for? Why this kind of methodology? And also a comment about the sort of the appreciation, one of the findings that highlighted the appreciation of one particular participant for virtual participation, especially for those who even in normal circumstances, even post-COVID, won't be able to get out of their homes because of some physical illness or ailment. What are the implications? Would you recommend that this is carried on even after the pandemic? Thank you.
Rosa, una pregunta és per què la metodologia comunicativa, quina característica té per aconseguir les dates que necessitàveu en l'estudi, i l'altra és si recomanaries aquest tipus d'aprenentatge més enllà de la pandèmia per a aquelles persones que es poden trobar en situacions d'aïllament a les seves cases o així.
Thank you. La metodología comunicativa, en diferencia a muchas otras que podemos encontrar, lo que rompe es el desnivel metodológico, porque dentro de la investigación, tanto las personas investigadoras tienen la obligación de aportar el conocimiento científico como las personas participantes opinar sobre ello. Conjuntamente, las dos rompen el desnivel metodológico. Bueno, podríamos ser más largo, pero creo que
As one of the key aspects of the methodology is the fact that in communicative methodology, the participation of both researchers and participants breaks the methodological gap that normally other methodologies have, because in this one, both have a commitment. The researchers have a commitment to bring about the scientific knowledge, and the participants bring about their knowledge about the experience, the environment, and the circumstances they live in, and together they create new knowledge.
En relación también de la metodología comunicativa, estamos como CREAS muy contentos y contentas, ¿no? Porque ahora la Comisión Europea creo que nos va a pedir a todos que contemos con la ciudadanía para esta co-creación del conocimiento.
From CREA, the research center we come from, and we're developing this methodology, we're very happy because the European Commission is now asking all of us researchers, about focusing on this way of working, the co-creation, to be able to include the knowledge of participants and citizenry in general.
Y para último, decir que creo que los participantes de educación de personas adultas a partir de ahora van a exigir también que hayan conexiones de este tipo y se van a hacer la parte física que necesitamos todo el mundo, pero también la parte no online. Por tanto, sí que tanto la recomiendo yo como creo que la van a exigir.
And Professor Royce finishes telling that besides that she does recommend this kind of participation, online participation in the circumstances presented by Rosie and by the question, she wants to highlight the fact that she thinks that they themselves, participants in adult education, are going to request continuation of this sort of learning because of the positive impact it has.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Much appreciated. Now I invite Dr. Doreen Said-Patch, Education Officer within the Department of Learning and Assessment Programs at the Ministry of Education and Employment, to present her paper on the use of formative assessment in online teaching and learning during the COVID-19 compulsory education school closure. Thank you.
Thank you, Razian, for this introduction, and good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to my presentation about formative assessment. So, how it all started. As has already been said, legal notices 41 and 77 enforced the temporary school closure and in the last term for the last scholastic year. And that meant that students were going to be out of school for 6 months, including the last term and the summer recess. However, being physically absent from school didn't mean that the core activity of school had to stop. In fact, teaching and learning had to carry on. And because of this sudden shift to online teaching and learning, intensive training was required, because it's in compulsory education, especially within the primary sector, teachers never taught online and neither were trained to teach online. And as much as the educators found themselves in this uncharted territory, leaders too found themselves in this unknown situation. And so myself as a leader, and also of needing to be of support to our educators, I had to learn as well. And during this learning period, I found myself thinking a lot and reflecting on the training that was being given to us, a training that was being provided by the Digital Literacy Department and other training providers, mostly about the web tools and the platforms that we had to use. And during this training, I realized the potential that these tools were offering for supportive assessment. Actually, they were strengthening what was being already done in the traditional classroom. And so this reflective thinking that led me to ask questions, but will the teachers use the formative assessment within these tools, within these platforms? Will they continue to use it? Will they start using it? what will happen? And this intellectual curiosity led to the birth of the study. This study was led by 4 aims, basically exploring, identifying, understanding, and finding. I wanted to explore the teacher's awareness of the formative assessment options offered by the online platforms and web tools. I wanted to identify the degree of implementation, if any, and wanted also to understand the ways in which it was practiced or the rationale if it was not used. And also, I was curious to find out whether teachers will keep using such practice once schools reopen. And these 4 aims were leading the study with the intent to inform, recommend, and contribute. Inform the professional trainers, be they from the formative assessment and the digital literacy camps, about the teachers' needs in these areas, to recommend the inclusion of formative assessment within the online teaching and learning in the National Assessment Policy that was in its embryonic phase prior to COVID-19. And this is a great lacuna in our country, that nationally we do not have an assessment policy, despite the fact that the NCF stated that colleges and schools need to have an assessment policy, and we do have a number of colleges and schools which have developed their own assessment policy, but in the absence of a national framework one, and also to contribute to the local and international literature about what is most important, in that we need to focus on the rationale and the tacit beliefs of why we're doing things, why we're implementing formative assessment, what are the benefits of formative assessment, rather than just focusing on the implementation of formative assessment to the letter. The spirit of the philosophy of formative assessment has to be given its due attention. And this study gives a snapshot at a particular point in time as per the experience of the participants. And that experience is very fluid. The experience is still evolving. So if this study had to be repeated and carried out at the present times, perhaps the results would have been a little bit different. Definitely, this study is not intended to generalize, but to offer a context in which the participants, with which the educators can relate and make connection with. The research questions that guided this study were mainly 2. The first one focused on the teacher's perceptions of formative assessment in the online teaching, and the other one focused more on the practices. The answers that pertain to the first research question were characterized mostly by certain misconceptions about formative assessment, that formative assessment is not valid, especially with young children. Young children are not up to formative assessment, and there was a sense of learned helplessness in statements like, how can you expect me to implement formative assessment if I wasn't trained in formative assessment in online teaching? And although I had to be faithful to the data and relay such findings, I think that as a professional, such response from the participants, I think it was quite a bit unfair on the training providers who supported us in very, very different ways through intensive training, and who showed us how formative assessment could be used through these tools. But perhaps the novel circumstances perhaps needed more time for the participants to learn more about it and to digest more how to use the formative assessment. In fact, if we take a look a bit at the training, 45% of the educators, in this case of my participants, engaged in self-taught training, which augurs very, very well. 32% participated in the webinars organized by the school, whilst 23%, almost 1/4 of the participants, did not attend. And they didn't attend not because they were not interested in attending training, but the reasons they gave were mostly due to emotional burnout or because they expected that their schools to organize such training. So I think the question that begs here is, should professional learning and development be the responsibility of the individual, the school, or both? It is a question which I think we need to ponder upon, because it would be interesting to see if these 23%, where would it go, whether it would go with the 45 or the 32%, if the emotional state wasn't an impinging factor as well in the training. And it is very, very likely that these 23% of teachers didn't engage in the use of the platforms, but used more traditional means of communication with the students, either the email or the school management platform or the Facebook closed group. But surely they didn't you make use of the platforms and all the available tools that we have at our disposal, because they didn't receive the training. So why use formative assessment in teaching and learning? Formative assessment surely needs no introduction, because voluminous literature has been written on the subject, and it has very strong research based of its cost effectiveness on students' achievement. It is important to point out that formative assessment is not an instruction program, but formative assessment is the philosophy behind that instruction program. It is based on the social theory of learning as understood by Vygotsky. It encourages and sustains the self-regulation and independent learning, and so it aligns well with the EU 2030 targets, the 21st century competencies. It also aligns well with the fourth Sustainable Development Goal of quality education, and also with the major policies, aims, and purposes that we have in our country, like the NCF, like the National Framework Strategy, the Inclusion Consultation Framework, and so on. Also, within the online environment, it offers the flexibility because if the educators don't opt for the synchronous sessions through the written feedback, although it will be delayed, but students can attend to it later. Repetition, because everything is stored online, and so access to it is very easy, and the students can relate to it, and also immediacy in the case of synchronous sessions. And it also supports the theory of connectivism, which is the theory used for online teaching and learning. The methodology, a mixed methods approach was used, in that the qualitative part was extracted from the 4 open-ended questions, and the quantitative from the 13 closed open-ended questions. It was a web-based questionnaire distributed to the educators through the Facebook pages for educators, and also with the help of the email shot on the staff iLearn address. Also, all these things after being granted permission both from the Directorate for Research and Lifelong Learning, as well as the Secretariat for Church School Education, and the respective administrations of the independent sector as well. The data was collected between the first week of May and until the end of June. And it is to be noted that such medium was used, and question and interviews weren't used, because if I used interviews, it wouldn't have returned the number of participants that it returned, because I will comment about the number of participants shortly after this. The data analysis was done through content analysis and through a 5-step approach, by initial reading of the data, filtering by cycle, the focus on the variation and the practice between the pre-COVID and during COVID, the evaluation of the combinations also of the data. As I said, interviews weren't used, because if I had used interviews, I wouldn't have been able to process this amount of data. In fact, 385 educators responded to my questionnaire, of which 171 hailed from the primary and 214 hailed from the secondary. And I have to admit that I was quite surprised by this return because I didn't expect a predominant return of secondary educators, considering the fact that formative assessment support in it was mostly being done, carried out in the primary rather than in the secondary. So that was quite an interesting result. Another interesting result is that the variation across the sectors equated almost with the quota of the national percentage, because in the state sector, it caters for 60%, and 61% of these 385 educators hailed from the state sector, 28% from the church, and 11% from the independent sector. So although the study isn't intended to be generalized, it gives a good representation of the educators across all the sectors within the Maltese schools. Obviously, it gave a predominant female input because our teaching cohort is mostly female. One of the results, as the table shows, there was a significant decline in the use of the formative assessment strategies. However, this table has to be interpreted with caution. The caution in the sense that if we look at the yes on a daily basis, that 221 pre-COVID doesn't mean that that has gone down to 120, but overall, because there were a few educators from the sometimes category who actually increased their practice. So they have gone up the ladder to the yes practice, while there was a significant number from the yes practice who have gone down to the sometimes practice. And the educators who didn't use formative assessment prior to the lockdown didn't use it neither during the lockdown. During the face-to-face teaching, the questioning strategy was the most common the most common strategy used, whereas in the online environment, oral and written feedback was the most common strategy used. And this tallies as well with the data, because this shows also the mix of synchronous and asynchronous sessions that were held, because oral feedback was mostly held during the synchronous and written feedback in the asynchronous and as a follow-up as well. In both the pre-COVID situation and during the COVID, the strategies that were used most were the four strategy combination, the learning intention, the success criteria, questioning, and feedback in both scenarios. If we take a look at the most common strategy that was used, the four strategy combination, the table 2 shows that before the lockdown, a total of 89 educators used this combination, and during the lockdown, this number has gone down to 61. And again, a deeper analysis into that, for example, 35 of the primary educators who used DS, and sometimes the shift can be seen in table 3, where in the yes category, we had 23 primary educators who used the 4 combination strategy on a daily basis. But then during the COVID, that has gone down to 7, 10 to sometimes, and 6 to no. And in trying to capture the variation by associating these percentages to the normal distribution curve, and the table, the text box below shows how I associated the variations. It shows that the major variation has happened in the primary sector. One reason could be that being the first time that having to go online and being with teaching young children, and also all the hindrances that teachers had to face, that could be a factor influencing the teachers' practices. The 3 main themes that issued were mainly issue of comfort zone, issue of mindset, and misconception about formative assessment. In terms of comfort zone, the teachers were either not totally confident in the use of the digital technology, or else they were not confident in both, in the use of formative assessment, in the use of digital technology, and in the use of formative assessment within the digital technology. The mindset
Sorry,
shows.
Doreen, just to remind you that you have a few more minutes.
Okay, thank you. The mindset, as I said, the teachers try their best when they try to implement the formative assessment, but if they have certain tacit beliefs that they are not convinced of what they're actually doing, that shows in their practices and in their comments as well. So the implications and the recommendations that I am putting forward are these, that we must invest to be more competent in the digital tools and the formative assessment. It is also important to rope in the students and the parents, because formative assessment is not a teacher thing, but a teacher and a student affair. It is important to clarify the misconceptions that in online teaching, it is not a replica of the class, and it should not be considered as inferior to the class. It is different, definitely, but it should be considered as inferior. It's important also to create professional learning communities to challenge the beliefs about this philosophy of teaching and learning, and to establish a growth mindset approach amongst the educators to overcome the fear of having their comfort zone challenged. And in conclusion, I conclude with these two reflections, that formative assessment should not be an option or an added burden, but a way of doing for effective teaching that will ultimately lead to student and school improvement. And although obstacles can be paramount, the teaching profession should ask, what can I do to change this scenario, rather than what others can do to change my scenario for me. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Doreen Seidpach. Can you please stop sharing your
Yes,
presentation?
Sure.
Thank you for a comprehensive and thought-provoking presentation. We have a comment here. I'm going to read it. Perhaps you would like to share your thoughts with us on it.
Yes, sure.
As professionals, we need to be proactive and continuously see how we can improve ourselves. We cannot continuously wait for the schools to think about our training. Yes, the school can organize certain training if they expect a specific skill. However, as educators, we need to keep on learning to be up to date with what our students need and with what the current world requires. What are your reactions to this comment?
Yes, I perfectly agree with this comment. And with the need to upskill ourselves to be of better service to our students and to fulfill the aims and the vision of the National Curriculum Framework, of the National Framework Strategy, we definitely need to upskill ourselves, and to do so, we cannot wait for others to offer us the training that we need to do. But it is important to self-evaluate, to identify our strengths and areas for improvement, so that we upskill those areas for improvement. So I definitely agree. That's why I posed the question, should be the responsibility of the individual, the school, or both?
Thank you very much, Dr. Doreen Seidpach. I pass on the floor to Dr. Rosian Farrugia.
Thank you both. It is now time for us to have a short break. So you can go get a cup of tea or move a bit about, and we'll see you in 15 minutes time, please. Thank you very much. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you are all ready for the second part of our research symposium. I am honored to present Professor Carmel Borch, Head of Department of the Arts, Open Communities and Adult Education Department at the Faculty of Education, University of Malta, to deliver his keynote speech on the impact of COVID-19 on education, a global perspective. Professor Borch, you may share your screen.
Okay. Let's check. Share screen. It's not coming. Okay, let's see.
Okay, you managed.
Yes, yes, yes. Okay.
Yes, good.
Share.
Yes, we can see your screen. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Professor Borg.
Yes. So first of all, welcome back from the break. My presentation is basically an around the world in 15 minutes presentation. So it's going to be very, very fast. So if you want to join me in this voyage, please, one health warning, just fasten your seatbelt and be ready for a very fast and bumpy ride. So this is a presentation which is based on my interactions, international interactions over the past, months while the pandemic was raging, and of course it is still raging. So it's basically a set of observations stemming from these international encounters and reviews of the literature in preparation for some of my work. So let me start by refreshing your memory. What happened exactly way back in the very beginning of the pandemic, roughly speaking around March, April. Basically 186 countries literally shuttered their schools and institutions of formal learning, sending, roughly speaking, 74% of the children and youth back home on a full-time basis. And that basically is tantamount to 1.5 billion children and youth. So right from the word go, I'm sure you're appreciating the extent, okay, and the huge figures that are relative to this present predicament. 1.5 billion students sent home on a permanent basis. This is an important slide as far as I am concerned, because the political rhetoric would love us or like us to believe that we are, all of us sharing the same boat, rowing on the same boat or swimming in the same ocean. Yes, we might be swimming in the same ocean, but as the picture is showing us, we might be boarding the same train, but we are located at different spaces within the same train. So some of us are obviously on the roof in very dangerous situations. Others obviously are sipping beer in the first class cabins. So from a sociological point of view, this political discourse that we are basically all on the same boat is completely false. As you will see, the pandemic intersects with social class, with ethnicity, with gender, with ability, etc., creating different, very different, sharply different situations for different families and different students. So please do keep this slide in mind, because my view of the world, my reading and understanding of the world is coming from a social justice perspective. And needless to say, I would be reminding you of this intersection of socio-economic and cultural location with the effects, the direct effects of the pandemic. Obviously, we've listened to a presentation by Leonard on the issue of technology and technology readiness. This should give you an idea of one of the biggest challenges that the world has as far as connectivity is concerned. Most of us were speaking about, pedagogy, formative assessment, etc. Here I'm speaking about the very basic, challenge that the globe was facing back in March and April, and is still facing to this very day. The issue of, the global digital divide. And this slide gives you an idea of the extent of this digital divide. 465 million children completely cut off from any platform, from any technological device, and therefore from any possibility for education, any educational interaction. 47% of all primary and secondary did not have access to any platform because they do not have internal internet connections at home. This figure of 47% or 465 million children and youth represents roughly the percentage of people around the globe, around the world, completely cut off from technology and from the internet. In fact, it stands, roughly speaking, about 3 billion people, which includes lots of parents, completely cut off. Which explains why then both UNICEF and UNESCO, as you know, two important agencies within the United Nations, hit the road running, asking, governments to reopen schools as quickly as possible, given the R factor was low, given that the pandemic was not raging within the community that surrounds the schools in question. So basically UNICEF was pleading to many governments, go back to schools, because schools are the only safe spaces for millions of children and youth around the world. Schools are the only educational spaces where children and youth, millions of them, can interact educationally with significant adults. So yes, keep this in mind. This was one of the, corollary, so to speak, collateral damage that was caused by the pandemic. And this pandemic brought to the fore, the extent of the digital divide that informs also many societies, including our society. Some of you spoken about teacher preparedness. These two paragraphs here give you an idea of the extent of the challenge as far as teacher preparedness is concerned. If we take, for example, Sub-Saharan Africa, 64% of teachers in primary schools and only 59% of teachers in secondary schools were trained to teach in 2018. We're not talking about online CPD here. We're talking about basics of teaching. As you can see, there is a huge deficit in certain parts of the world as far as basic teacher formation is concerned. In richer areas, in more developed areas, OECD countries in particular, only 60% of teachers have had recent professional development on using ICT for teaching and learning purposes. So basically, the narrative that we were sharing today as far as the local situation is concerned is shared regionally and globally, basically. Many teachers around the world, many systems around the world were obviously found wanting as far as online experience is concerned and level of teacher preparedness is concerned. Now, obviously, this brings us to the issue discussed already by some of us, the effectiveness of online learning. So if you look at the literature internationally that has come out before COVID and is still coming out during COVID, normally this literature would not pit face-to-face learning against online learning, but basically is focusing more and more on the quality, on the intersection of the quality of online learning with scholastic achievement. So basically, we're not saying here that online learning is intrinsically inferior to face-to-face learning. What we're saying here through research is that there are different levels of quality of online learning, and obviously the intersection of quality of online learning with scholastic achievement depends on the kind of criteria that I am listing at the bottom end of this particular slide. It has to do, therefore, with administrative support, course content, course design, instructor characteristics, learner characteristics, social support, and technical support. So basically, the kind of research that I am aware of, which is coming out in the context of the pandemic, is showing us that, you know, the same analysis correlates the quality of remote learning with student progress. The authors assert that students experiencing average quality remote learning continued to progress, but at a slower pace than if they had remained in school. Students who were getting lower quality remote learning and poor home support were generally stagnated at their current grade levels, and those who ended off the radar or were completely disengaged lost significant ground. So here we have two very important variables that were influencing the rate of scholastic, you know, achievement and success in the context, in the shadow of the pandemic. On one hand, you have the home conditions, and as far as home conditions are concerned, if we speak locally, despite the progress that we have registered throughout the years, the correlation between socioeconomic status as far as, you know, cultural capital is concerned, as far as economic capital is concerned, as far as social capital is concerned, there is still a very strong correlation between, therefore, socioeconomic status and scholastic achievement. That is not, therefore, something that we alone experience as a country, but obviously there's a lot of literature on this issue. But on the other side, we have, in the context of the pandemic, the quality of online learning that was on offer for different students. So yes, as far as the literature on online learning is concerned, it's not enough to speak in a general sense on online learning. We have to dissect that analysis and talk about quality of online learning. Now, as far as the pandemic is concerned, from a sociological point of view, this is not a neutral, you know, pandemic. COVID is not sociologically neutral, and it hit women very, very hard. And in fact, you know, as far as gender is concerned, women were the net losers from the pandemic. Why? Because obviously, to start with, at the bottom of this slide, you can see that 70% of health workers and first respondents are women, which basically means that women not only lost their work, but were more extensively quarantined than men, more extensively quarantined their fathers. And when you have a situation, as you can see, of single parenthood, mostly mothers, you can imagine, okay, the extent of the difficulties faced by this particular family and the impact of that situation on scholastic achievement and scholastic success. So we cannot separate student progress from these scenarios. All things being equal, especially in the developed world, as far as student achievement is concerned, when we compare the genders, basically COVID exacerbated the scholastic achievement gaps as far as the gender issue is concerned. And although results have not come out for our country, I'm pretty sure that COVID will reinforce the achievement gap intersected with gender. And as you know from results, PISA results, etc., we do have a gender gap. Girls outperform boys as far as the basic competencies are concerned, and the net losers as far as achievement is concerned are working class, low socioeconomic boys. My prediction is that that will be reinforced, and research which is coming out internationally is reinforcing my expectation as far as the intersection of gender and scholastic achievement is concerned. But obviously, that is talk about achievement. Escalating poverty and school closures exacerbated girls' and women's unpaid care work, as we said, limiting the time to learn at home. And the absence of schools as safe spaces heightens the risk of gender-based violence, early marriages, and unintended pregnancy, sexual exploitation, and abuse faced by many adolescent girls. So this is another dimension of the impact of COVID on students and youth from a gender perspective. Moving on from gender to socioeconomic status, several reports are showing us that the pandemic will push between 70 and million people into extreme poverty. And as you know, there is a very strong correlation, there is very strong link between poverty and scholastic achievement. Now, of course, United Nations Agenda 2030 comes to mind. Unfortunately, the pandemic not only arrested or put the brakes on progress with regard to, the elimination of poverty, access to, equal access to quality education, etc. But all the statistics are showing that the world will be regressing as far as the 17 objectives in the 2030 agenda, and the elimination of poverty is one of the goals which will feel strongly the pinch of COVID-19. Obviously, when we speak of poverty, a category of people which is often overlooked in our discourse on the intersection of socioeconomic status, on social context and economic context with scholastic achievement is the migrant population. And as you might know, migrant populations bore the brunt, the economic brunt of the pandemic, as you can see from the second highlighted sentence. In the particularly hard-hit hospitality industry, a quarter of employees in the EU are foreign-born, twice their share in overall employment. So basically, if we want to speak about poverty in the context of the pandemic, we cannot overlook the issue of migration, because, as I said, migrants were hardest hit by the pandemic, and that will definitely leave a very serious mark on children coming from migrant backgrounds who would not normally have the level of support that one would normally expect of a household. If we want to get a glimpse of the intersection of socioeconomic status with scholastic achievement, I think one important study is by Blaney in the UK, a huge sample of 250,000 students, and the results speak for themselves. It's very clear that, the pandemic hit scholastic achievement very, very hard, but definitely it hit hardest in disadvantaged areas of the UK, in schools which are, heavily dependent on, state aid, etc. So I think this very important study coming from the UK speaks volumes on the intersection of scholastic achievement with socio-economic status.
Professor Boyd, just to remind you that you have another 5 minutes, please.
Yes, sure. So
Thank
I
you.
will skip a few slides, but I think this is a very important slide indeed, because it will take us directly into the home environment and focuses on parental stress. Loads and loads of research is coming out studying the intersection or the link, the correlation between parental stress, the stress experienced by parents, and the quality of parenting offered by parents. So emerging research from Singapore this time has shown that parents' perceived impact of COVID-19 is associated with increased parenting stress and in turn increased risk of harsh parenting. So basically research around the world is reporting high levels of domestic violence, and that includes violence on children as a result directly correlated with parental stress. I will skip these slides. They focus on disability, again another category which was very hardly hit by the pandemic. A few words on time on task and performance. This is research which was obviously conducted, which has been conducted for several years now, pre-COVID, studying the intersection of time on task and number of hours spent on task and performativity. And to cut a long story short, there is ample evidence showing through research in the context of the pandemic that the number of contact hours were reduced during the pandemic, the number of on-task hours were reduced during the pandemic, the number of hours of interaction with significant adults was reduced, and this would definitely affect adversely, as research is showing, scholastic achievement, scholastic success, performativity, etc., etc. So we cannot deny the fact of that there is a correlation, and that obviously many children who did not have the equivalent support at home suffered a lot from the very fact that the number of hours of contact hours of hours time on task were reduced and reduced significantly. So I would skip these. There is a lot of research on truancy. Unfortunately, one of the symptoms of the pandemic and of this sudden shift from face-to-face physical encounter to online is the high levels of truancy and the high levels of disengagement, which is obviously immediately reflected in the performance of children. Mental health, of course, there is one research, lots of research, but of course, this is one of them. Sprang and Silman show that children who were isolated or quarantined during pandemic diseases are more likely to suffer from acute stress disorder, adjustment disorder, and grief. I have to say that research on the intersection of the pandemic with mental health did not start with the pandemic. It started long time ago. There's a lot of research trying to analyze the correlation, for example, between the great financial crisis that we've had in 2008 and 2009, analysis of earthquakes, hurricanes, blizzards, etc., with scholastic achievement. So the research that tries to understand the direct correlation between the pandemic or extraordinary events and mental health issues have a long history. So basically, to end on this story, there are lots and lots of slides to come up, but I will end with two basic policy directions. One would be that, of course, the expectation is that through formative assessment, we've obviously had a presentation on this subject. We have to keep a very close eye on the scholastic achievement, and we cannot take for granted that we can start you know, a year or a semester, not knowing exactly where students stand as far as their personalized scholastic voyage is concerned. But obviously, perhaps more important than scholastic achievement is the mental state of many children. Research is showing that it's not all well for many children, and therefore I would say that schools are duty-bound, educational spaces are duty-bound to create safe and empathic and emotionally sound spaces for whoever is involved in the scholastic situation, be it students, administrators, teachers, and of course, parents as important stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Borg, for your interesting presentation. And we have some comments. I'll try to present two to you. One of them asks whether you have any information about the impact that COVID-19 has left on school leaders and how it affected their role within their school community. I have another one from a social justice and rights-based perspective. Is physical school closure a viable option for a rising R factor, considering the impact on children who basically see school as the only safe space for them? Then there are other questions that you might wish to answer silently after the session. Thank you.
Yes, as I said, obviously, I always, in my comments, put health first, and I do empathize with UNESCO's and UNICEF's position that, you know, wherein they were pleading all along to make sure that our communities are safe, and therefore safety as far as health is concerned meant that it was physically possible to open schools. As I said, and this is a global perspective, not only a local perspective, earlier in my presentation, millions of children were completely shut off from any educational encounter. As I said, for millions of children, school was not only the only educational space, but also the only safe space in their life. And therefore, with that in mind, UNICEF basically pushed all along that the sooner we open our schools, the better, from always the perspective of children indeed, from the perspective of children living on the margins and in the peripheries. As I said, research is coming out, looking also into privileged homes. I wouldn't say that privileged homes weren't affected by the pandemic. My home is a case in point, but research is showing net differences between homes, and privileged homes normally through cultural capital, through social capital, through economic capital would cushion to a certain extent the negative effects of such a pandemic. So my passionate, you know, approach to this subject is a result of, as I said earlier, my social justice perspective. So oftentimes privileged, or rather commentators operating from a privileged position, do not see the point of, you know, opening the schools so urgently. So that's one question. The other question obviously has to do with leadership. Basically, as far as leadership is concerned, the discussions we've had internationally were focusing on the right of education as a basic and fundamental right, and therefore the importance as leaders engaged in shared leadership, and therefore this is not just the responsibility of the school management team, but it's a collective responsibility of all significant adults engaged with children. Our responsibility is therefore to make sure that we keep in mind that education is a fundamental human right, and we cannot divest of our responsibility from that right. And also we have to make sure as shared leadership or leaders sharing the same responsibility, that wherever the context of education is, be it face-to-face full-time, be it online full-time, be it hybrid, etc., we have to make sure that these rights keep guiding us in the quality of provision that we provide. So the role, essentially, the role of the significant adults did not change with the pandemic. Our role has remained constant and informed by our ethical and moral responsibility towards providing quality education for all, irrespective of the child's socio-economic and cultural background.
We thank you, Professor Borg. You can stop sharing your screen now. Thank you very much. There are some other questions you might wish to answer.
Sure.
Thank you. I am now pleased to introduce Kerry McLennan, Associate Dean at the School of Education and Social Work, University of Dundee, Scotland, to present the paper co-authored with her colleagues, Dr. Daniela Merchia and Dr. Duncan Merchia, on What Can I Do? Caring relationships among teachers, students and families during COVID-19 lockdown in Scotland. Thank you, Kerry.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the board for this opportunity to present the paper. You'll see at the bottom of the screen there I've popped in a website which I'll come back to. There's another opportunity to capture that website at the end of the presentation. So this is part of a larger project of data gathering that we undertook from March to the end of June 2020. Scotland went into lockdown on the 23rd of March last year, and this research question shows our broader research for our larger project. Daniela is the lead for our overarching project, and there are a number of colleagues at the School of Education and Social Work who are participating. Our parameters is we've had interviews with approximately 60 primary school teachers and head teachers in Scotland. An open invitation was posted on social media for volunteers to participate, and we conducted online interviews which were semi-structured. Those that couldn't participate in this interviews were offered the opportunity to take part in a survey. We're now in the process of, we've just gained funding for transcription of all of our interviews, so that this is an ongoing piece of work. And we're about to start analysing our clusters of data in a much larger way. And this is what this website is for here, where we'll be updating ongoing publications and analysis. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank all the educators that were interviewed at such a particularly stressful time in their working lives. So this research process for this project, we began very early in the second week of lockdown. 3 interviews were analysed in depth for this paper, one at the end of March, one in mid-April and one in mid-May. And the questions here in the bullets show you the kind of things that they were asked. And for this project, we had 3 participants, Jeannie, Becky and Ailsa. All 3 were over the age of 30. Jeannie was qualified for only 2 years and had been with her school for less than 6 months. She had 4 children of her own at home and was engaged and interested in using online technology. Her pupils were aged 10 or 11 in the upper stages of the Scottish primary school sector. Becky had many years of experience in a number of different schools. She had no children and she was very engaged as a Microsoft educator, very comfortable supporting not only her own class, who were age 5 pupils in the first year of Scottish schooling, but also supporting her colleagues in her own school and beyond. Ailsa had many years of teaching, but had only ever taught in the one school, which also happened to be the school in the catchment area where she lived. So she had quite a different connection with her pupils. She had 2 of her own teenage children, and she would be the least comfortable with technology, but she did have this advantage of living locally with her school. She also was a teacher of the upper stages. All 3 teachers showed their desire to stay connected to their students and to support them. So just some points to bear in mind that we're taking an approach with this research. Every teacher's lived experience is unique, and we've all got our own stories of living lockdown and how we interact with the data being shared. And there were areas we were curious about, but we wanted teachers' voices to emerge in this research. So we're not claiming a representative sample, and our outcomes are not to be generalised. So this paper is based, this theoretical understanding is grounded in the work of Nell Noddings and her relational ethics. And the core of this is that if care is a fundamental reality of life, then care has to be relational. And at its most basic form, it's a connection or an encounter between 2 humans. One is the caring, the one doing the caring, and one is the cared for, and the recognition of that care in this space. So these encounters, of course, become different under lockdown. They become more digital rather than face-to-face in the conventional sense. So 3 core ideas for this paper is that the carer is attentive to the cared for. So the carer listens, observes, and reciprocates to the needs of the cared for. And in this situation, the listening goes beyond listening and understanding for its own purpose, but it's also listening that has an affective factor. So there's an empathy that should be in existence there as well. The carer must reciprocate to the one who cares. So this must be 2-sided. So the contribution of the cared for is essential, even if it's basic. So the example we use is a baby stopping crying or smiling at its mother. It could also be a child smiling to their teacher, for instance. And it's important to touch on the difference between the ethics of care versus care as a virtue in this sphere. So care as a virtue is an individual attribute that focuses on virtuous acts of the carer. The focus is on the character of the person involved in the act of care, whereas with Noddings' ethics of care, the focus is on the relationship and not on the person doing the caring per se. So there's no prior assumption of virtue, and it's the relationship that underpins that caring. So within this research then, our research question for this paper was, how did primary teachers in Scotland make sense of the caring relation during COVID-19 lockdown, which was a theme that came across to us quite strongly. And here I'm about to give you a flavour of the findings, that we identified 3 themes: the Scottish system in caring, and then reciprocity, and then interestingly the parents as an in-between factor, and that manifested itself in different ways. So the parental presence in the teaching and learning process, teachers' awareness of the pressure on parents, their availability for parental support, and also themselves as parents, which made their caring responsibilities more complex. So theme 1 within the Scottish system in caring. So caring under the banner of inclusion in Scotland is integral to the system. It's not without its tensions, but nevertheless, every teacher does have an understanding that their relationship with the child, particularly in the primary sector, goes beyond that one of it being an academic process. So here, Jeannie is aware of this particular struggle, and what we're seeing is an awareness in these teachers of their students' needs at an individual level. So Jeannie's child here that she describes as a young carer herself, the mum's a single parent with 6 children. So this child is not getting the support that she needs, and Jeannie anguishes about this. However, there are also constraints to sustaining the relationship, and in this next quotation, this one really touched us with this phrase, what can I do, what can I do, what can I do? That Becky, who's expert with technology, struggles with how to connect with her children. And the constraint here is the GDPR regulation that we have in the UK about child protection. So it's about how to reach the children. Many of our local authorities at the time would not allow for children to switch their cameras on, for instance, or indeed to do synchronous teaching. It had to be asynchronous if they were connecting to their pupils back then. And here's another form of constraint. Now, Ailsa shows here that the guidance provided with the best of intentions by those on high can create a hurdle in regards to the teaching relationship. So this was evident in quite a lot of the schools. And Ailsa was somebody that was interviewed in May, so she'd already been several weeks into lockdown, and she was realising that her children needed to move on with their learning, but the guidance, both from the unions, well-intentioned not to overburden the teachers' workload, and also from local authorities, was that they shouldn't be teaching new knowledge, that they should just be consolidating the work that the children were already doing. And Ailsa here is expressing her frustration that she can't support her children's learning because she sees that as part of her responsibility as well. And moving on now to theme 2, that of reciprocity. So here you see that Jeannie is showing us the importance that she feels in this dialogue that she's able to, or she's trying to achieve with her pupils. So she wasn't actually familiar with the digital platform that was being used, but soon came to realise the importance of it as a communication tool. And she says here that she could respond directly to the students' work. So there was this idea of how to actually engage back. The children show a response, but then how do you engage back? And she could respond using these digital platforms. All 3 of the teachers interviewed emphasised their constant awareness that they were not always reaching their children through technology. So Ailsa was somebody that developed lots of packs of work. She went into her school, snuck in and did lots of photocopying and gave them all packs at the start. But that was to satisfy their actual learning, but to stay in contact with them through that caring relationship. She expresses here how much she emailed with them and checked in with them every day, and also interpreted their work according to what she knew of them and warned them about stopping, you know, so that they didn't overload themselves. And then this big quote here is a really fundamental one for us as well, because Ailsa, remember, is the teacher who lives near her pupils. So this was her way of connecting, getting broad beans in a bag of soil for their topic work and leaving them in her front garden. So most of the children she was able to connect with by them visiting her physically, albeit at a safe distance. And you see here, she says, we'd have a nice wee chat. But the ones that were harder to reach, so the boy who lives about 10 miles away, she actually drove out and posted his work through his door, and importantly, clapped eyes on him so that she could see him. And then another child who she knew wasn't engaging, she actually went round and did a couple of home visits. So clearly in this encounter with the seeds, the cared for is receiving the caring and shows that it's been received. She's acknowledged the need for the students' connection, and she responds to that need and shows them care, and they acknowledge that she has cared for them. So the beans and soil are Ailsa's way of caring, her way of being in relation with the children.
Terry, just a reminder that you have a few more minutes, please.
Thank you. So the final theme here, there are 4 sub-themes to the parents in between the teacher and the student. So the first one is the parental presence in the teaching and learning process. So the teachers interviewed mentioned being caught between trying to make their pedagogy available to parents and keeping in mind that parents are not teachers. So Becky's rationale in sharing her play-based pedagogy was that she hoped it would prevent parents from putting pressure on their early years children. So these are 5-year-old children, and she was sensing that sometimes the parents would want to sit them at the dining table and engage them in quite traditional type study that fitted their perceptions of learning. And then another theme, the teachers are aware of the pressure on the parents. So Becky is also considering it her job to reassure the parents that they're doing a great job, realising that she can't know all the intricate difficulties that they're dealing with at home. So here we see that there's an element of the parents being the cared for in order to ultimately support the children. Taking the pressure off the parents may take the pressure off the children. And then the third sub-theme is that the teachers feel that they should be available for parental support. So this quotation from Jeannie shows the complexity of the caring dynamic. They need to support more than just their student. So potentially the entire family, in fact, may need support. And then finally, the teachers as parents making their caring responsibilities of their own more complex. So Ailsa can't focus only on her own family. There's a sense of her not being able to switch off from her duty of care to her students, where she says that despite what she's doing, she's constantly got an eye on Teams and on her email. And then Jeannie, who has 4 children of different ages, states that it's hard to switch off. I mean, I keep my kids up later at night so that I can do my work in the morning. So she's actually changing her children's behaviour to enable her to better connect with her students during the day. So our conclusions are that the context shows that it's a very complex, uncertain situation with a real sense of urgency back at the start, and also back at the start, it was very fast changing. The teachers are totally focused on a commitment to the relationship with their students. This want to care and have that relation with their pupils is ever present. And their methods that they have to use are different to the conventional ones, and actually sometimes unusual, as we saw with the beans and the seeds. And the different care relationship, so it goes beyond what they were doing pre-COVID, it's going beyond that norm that they would have in mind, and our conclusion would then be that this opens up new possibilities of caring. So thank you for listening, and there's the website again, should anybody wish to take a screenshot.
Thank you, Kerry. We have a couple of comments. One is about the teachers' frustration with GDPR restrictions and their inability to reach children in their homes, especially those who need most support. And another question or comment, their comments actually, about the changing role of parents and the understanding that parents are not pedagogues. And also your comment about sort of the teachers' efforts to take pressure off parents so that we take pressure off children. So one is about the parents and the other one is about the frustration of teachers, basically.
Yeah, I think so. For instance, GDPR is obviously there to safeguard children, but it did mean at the start it was very challenging. And in Scotland, the responsibilities are quite devolved to local governments, local authorities, excuse me. So they can say you're allowed what you're allowed to do. So for instance, you can all do synchronous teaching with cameras on, or you can't. So at the start, teachers were working out what would they use Teams, would they use different methods, and it was very challenging for them to navigate that arena of what are we actually allowed to do. And it definitely did make reaching their children harder. And then the parents, I think we've seen that emerge more significantly perhaps this time round in Scotland. So we've had children at home again since Christmas, and our primary 1 to 3, so our age 5 to 7s have only just returned to school on the 8th of March, with our older children going back on the 15th. And parents are showing there really the intense struggle that they feel. Back in March, April, I think there was an understanding of everybody's just coping, whereas more recently the teachers have really, the parents have really been under stress, and there's been a wide acknowledgement that they're not teachers and they can't do the teacher's job. What our data back then showed was that the teachers were constantly trying to reassure, but actually not always managing to get them to change their very traditionally ingrained methods.
Yes. Thank you for that, Kerry. I'm going to move on to the next presentation, which builds on a paper written by the Early Childhood and Primary Education Research Team, composed of 8 members from the Department of Early Childhood and Primary Education, Faculty of Education, University of Malta. I would like to invite Dr. Charmaine Bonello to deliver the presentation on behalf of her colleagues and co-authors, Professor Susan Gatt, Dr. Josephine De Guara, Dr. Josephine Milton, Dr. Tanya Muscat, Dr. Lara Said, Dr. James Viteri, and myself. The paper is called Tracing the Birth and Growth of an Online Collaborative Research Team During COVID-19, a narrative inquiry of 8 female academics in Malta. Charmaine, you may share your screen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Farrugia. I am sharing my screen now. Okay, thank you. So good evening, everyone. I am here sharing this presentation on behalf, as Dr. Farrugia said, on behalf of the ECHPE research team, Early Childhood and Primary Education Research Team, within the Department of Early Childhood and Primary Education at the University of Malta. And I will be talking about our collaborative work and the paper titled Tracking the Birth and Growth of the ECHPE team. Professor Susan Gatt made reference to this team as well. And this presentation will basically explain the birth and growth of this team. So how it all started? It started in April 2020, almost a year ago, when 2 members of the research team felt the need to get closer to their colleagues while maintaining physical distance And also they identified an urgent need to fill in a gap in local research on COVID-19 and early and primary education in Malta. So this led, from a phone call, it led to the inception of the Early Childhood and Primary Research Team. As Dr. Farrugia mentioned, these are the members of the team. We are a group of 8 female academics within the Department of Early Childhood and Primary Education at the University of Malta. And we decided to start our first collaborative write-up in September 2020. And since we saw that our team is functioning, we sustained our work, and we agreed that we should document and track the birth and growth of this remote research group, as well as a self-reflective exercise for us as academics working in a group for the first time and online, and hopefully to be an inspirational read to other academics as well in higher education. So our research question was, what can we, as a group of 8 female academics, learn from our shared lived experiences of the birth and growth of the HPE Online Collaborative Research Team during the COVID-19 pandemic? Our work was based on 8 personal narratives, and also it was the theoretical underpinnings of our work were linked to social learning theories through our shared vision that learning is socially situated and socially constructed, and also to elements of feminist thinking, because we are contributing to knowledge as a group of female researchers in academia, and also as well as we, as all members, we valued ourselves as agents of our own learning by positioning ourselves as participant researchers within an equitable and democratic collaborative narrative inquiry. Our literature review was framed by these 3 concepts, which were collaborative research teams, where we also talked about the international discourse about the quality research output from collaborative research teams, and also the failure of when collaborative research teams experience fatigue as well. The knowledge creation, knowledge retention, and knowledge innovation of online collaborations, and the significant value of these beyond offline spaces. And an interesting concept was academic identity, which is not the focus of many within research. So academic identity is socially constructed and negotiated and reshaped, informed by being part of, obviously in higher education, of communities within communities through processes of becoming and unbecoming. And our stories in this paper will tell how online collaboration impacted on our academic identities as well, individually and also as a team. The methodology, as I explained, is about our lived experiences, individual narratives from 8 female academics, the participant researchers, and this helped as well to move our relationships to center stage and trust each other and share our stories. And we obviously analyze this through thematic analysis to create new holistic understandings and follow the lead from them from the lead of the interlocking narratives that were identified. Basically, the key findings lead to 5 key strands. The first was the birth of the team, where a challenge that was brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. So as academics, we were sort of separated and home, and obviously there was university closure as well. We felt that this was the rainbow after the storm, because we got connected through the online. Obviously, we used Zoom. We got connected. We started to work together to do research, because we felt the need to do research on COVID. And hopefully you will see further publications from the team about this. And this was basically done through a sort of sense of trust and positiveness and possibility thinking to explore new horizons. Our stories showed that there was this group energy being created from the interactions, the online interactions we were having through each other through difficult times. And so we were seeing the third strand, we were seeing this online collaborative research as a blessing through online collaboration, because it was being effective. We were having the opportunity to meet often, to discuss, to learn from each other, to increase our skills. And also, we started to encounter then some difficulties as well. For example, time management, the way we need to communicate and collaborate remotely. We did not have experience of this before as 8 female academics, but our stories show that through our courage together and by empowering each other, we were also overcoming and fine-tuning these new challenges that we experienced through online collaboration. We were also reshaping and negotiating our identities as female academics who were empowering, supporting, and mentoring each other in a team over time and space. And this helped us to construct our identities, like, for example, some of us, for example, took on the role of mentors. Some of us who are more seasoned professors in their team took on the role of mentors within the team. Others who, like me, were new to the academic field at university, were seeing this as an opportunity to blossom into real academics and take turns in being leaders, for example, in small writing groups within the team. And also this helped us as well to reconstruct our identity within a team where we removed power and hierarchy, and this was replaced with our conscious efforts for all members to be equally valued and heard. Now, this is where, this is the 5 key strands from our stories developed into a 6-tier pyramid that characterizes the birth and growth of our team. And the script framework, this progressive pyramid, stands for skills, knowledge, relationships, identity, philosophy, and trust. Now I will unpack each tier to summarize what we learned from the 8 personal narratives as we sought to track down the birth and growth from the 5 identified key strengths. So I start from trust. So the trust shows our intimidating opening move, which was not easy to take the leap of faith, as Katrina and Jody explains. Obviously, these are not the real names of the academics. We used other names. These were supported by our possibility thinking and learning power. So instead of giving up and through difficult times, we are seeing limitations as academics, we used this team, we got together and created this team to possibility think. And through our stories, we discovered this learning power built on, it was very often mentioned, our positiveness, openness, and motivation, and the sense of trust in ourselves as women who reflect and are aware of their strengths and their talents. So that felt like it was the foundation on which this team started. Next, there was sort of in our comments, in our stories, like the our shared values and belief as 8 female academics who are committed to lifelong learning, who wanted to get together to continue to learn together and from each other. And this permitted also our positioning in this paper as well as research subjects to act as agents of learning in a narrative inquiry. So the shared philosophy was important. Now, sort of the dual core of all this, of how we are sustaining this research team. So first we had the trust, and it was evident that this trust and shared philosophy was allowing us to be vulnerable, to give attention to the construction of our academic and gender identities, also as individuals and also within a team. Concurrently, the stories show that we were gradually developing the courage skills needed to be able to fine-tune every challenge we are facing and come across and strengthen our relationships. So while we were overcoming the challenges, we were also harvesting our relationships. And this worked as a dual core within the growth of the research team. So they were like 2 distinct processes, hybrid, working simultaneously. And they were central to the effective functioning of the remote collaborative research work. And these first four building blocks and this hybrid process between identity and relationships feeding on each other through our stories, it resulted into our knowledge and skill advancement. All members of the team were highlighting in their narratives the skills they learned, the knowledge they learned from each other, which would have been impossible to learn by researching on your own.
You have a few more minutes, Sharmay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farrugia. So this representation is not the end of our script, the script framework. It's not fully written for us. We know that we must stick together. It's been almost a year now, as best team players do, to sustain our journey of trust, shared philosophy, the reshaping and negotiating our identities, and harvesting our relationships as our advancement of knowledge and skills begets new knowledge. And in conclusion, we feel that if other academic researchers take that leap of faith, they may open a window to, like we experienced, broaden their chances to possibility think, rethink and reimagine constructed assumptions and beliefs on collaborative research, learning and technology, extend their chances to learn from others, permit innovation and co-creation and co-construction of knowledge, increase focus on research, allow for writing with others and publishing more. In fact, we just submitted our second paper. We'll soon be publishing more papers and technical reports from our research team. Interact and give attention to the construction of personal and professional identities. Not being part of this team, I think I would not have been able to do this. Supports a commitment to lifelong learning and enhances our remote communicative and collaborative skills, which we can then use with our students as well. And obviously for further research, we encourage others to continue along this line and obviously to see how such research groups across cultures and contexts are being sustained and also perhaps why they are experiencing fatigue and what could be done. To conclude, we feel as HPE research team, we feel that this was our COVID-19 gift to the scientific community, and we end our paper with this sentence, which I'm going to read here. We trust that the script framework inspires other individuals to take that leap of faith and trigger online collaborative research within their contexts. Your script could end up in leaving a legacy behind of your work and what you have built. So thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Bonello. A couple of comments. First, about the script framework. Could you perhaps explain a bit how it originated from, you mentioned the strands and then the script framework. Perhaps you elaborate a bit on that. And also, at one point, you used words such as empower, support, and mentor, which are quite powerful words and indicative of an open mindset towards collaboration and joint professional growth. Mm-hmm. How do you suggest that this may help you as academics in your work with students, with trainee educators, basically?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'll start with the first one, how the script framework originated. Obviously, when we analyze the narratives from the thematic analysis, first that we had those 5 key strands emerged. And from those 5 key strands, we could see that from the beginning till the end, there was like this sort of trust coming out. The trust, the philosophy after each other. And when we saw them the other way around, it was the word script. So it was quite a novel discovery. And we thought, we should represent it. It should conceptualize the birth and growth of our research team. And since we did narrative inquiry, script fitted perfectly with that. And yes, it easily represents the birth and growth of the HPE team. As regards to empower, support, and mentor, and how this may link to what we do as academics in the field, I feel that by being on your own and researching on your own, I think, and this was in our stories as well, you cannot gain certain knowledge and co-construct new knowledge like you do with other teams. For example, certain ideas that came up like this framework and whatever, it was only possible through our long hours of discussion together online. And why we are discussing online, new ideas are coming, innovative ideas are coming, which would not have been possible if you were writing a paper on your own. So yes, we do share this with our students to get together, collaborate together, criticize also their work together, their teaching practice together. In fact, we're just doing it now as well after teaching practice, because by talking about it together and by reflecting as well, this was self-reflective practice. And for our roles in academia, I think this is very important because we often do not have time to stop and think and reflect on what we are doing, and especially on our academic identities as well. Who we are, where do we want to be, and who do we want to become. So this process as well, being part of such a group, it gives us the possibility, as our students should have, to share our voices, to stop, reflect, and grow together, not on our own.
Thank you, Dr. Charmaine. There are some questions in the Q&A you might wish to answer after your presentation.
Thank you very much, I will.
We have come to our last presentation entitled The Co-action Model to Explore Remote Teacher and Learning Support Educator Collaboration during COVID-19 School Closure in Malta. I invite Ms. Claire Shiberras, Head of Department for Inclusion and Doctoral Student, to present this paper written in collaboration with Heathcliff Schembri. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farrugia, for this introduction. I am currently sharing my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. Good evening, everyone. I am Claire Shiberras, who together with Mr. Heathcliff Schembri have carried out a research study on collaboration between teachers and LSCs while schools in Malta shifted to remote teaching during the COVID-19 pandemic situation. Mr. Heathcliff and myself would like to commence this presentation by showing our appreciation towards the University of Malta, the Faculty of Education, and in particular, the Malta Review of Educational Research, MRER, Professor Kalmer Borch, as well as the guest editors, Professor Suzanne Gatt, Dr. Roseanne Farrugia, and Dr. Charmaine Bonello, for believing in our paper and for giving us the opportunity to present our findings during this symposium. So thank you so much for this opportunity. What Mr. Schembri and myself aimed for during this study was to explore how the experience of remote collaboration between teachers and learning support educators during the COVID-19 situation aligns with the co-action model. In the first part of this research, we carried out a systematic literature review so as to explore which characteristics need to be in place for teaching teams to flourish in terms of collaboration. The two illustrations on this slide indicate the scholarly search portals which were used to carry out this systematic literature review and the terms which were included in this search. As most of you know, the term learning support educator term is something which is used, I think, only in Malta, because when we carried out the systematic literature review, we had to use other terms which other countries tend to make reference to LSCs in their schools. For instance, classroom assistants, para-educators, teaching assistants. So we were looking into papers which actually researched such roles. At the initial stage of the systematic literature review, 53 papers were identified, and after eliminating the duplicates and literature which was not actually related to collaboration between teachers and LSCs, this research included 17 studies within its text. This enabled Mr. Schembri and myself to develop the conceptual framework and coin the term the co-action model. The co-action model has 8 elements in it, and each element within the model indicates the characteristics which are required for teacher and LSC teams to work in a synchronized and collaborative manner. In the second part of this research, what we wanted to delve into was to see how this co-action model aligns with the experiences of teachers and LSCs whilst they were carrying out the remote learning experience. So part 2 of the methodology was based upon semi-structured interviews with 6 teaching teams these teaching themes, the sample included themes which were who taught from kindergarten to year 6, and they were recruited from the 3 main clusters in Malta, northern part, southern, and central part. 3 of the teaching teams had 1 teacher and 1 LSC in the classroom, whilst the other three had 1 teacher and 2 LSCs in the classroom. The interview schedule was had 5 sections. What we were looking at was the collaborative experience of the team prior to the school closure period, and what benefits and challenges the teaching teams experienced during remote learning when the actual lockdown took place. With regards to the first element in the coaction model, what we managed to explore was that although the roles of the class teacher and the LSC are different, during remote teaching, these were complementary, and hence there was no distinction between the 2 roles. Indeed, ideas were implemented by the teaching teams, irrespective whether the idea being implemented was that of the LSC or that of the teacher. Sometimes the LSC also took the role of presenting content online because the teacher needed to observe and assess the children whilst this content was being presented. So the element of clarity in roles was explored in that way. With regard to the second element of the coaction model, open communication, mostly took place through Microsoft Teams, WebEx, Cisco. There were video calls on Messenger, and Google Classroom was used as an online repository. Communication extended after school hours and also during weekends. And before content was actually being presented to the students, this was being circulated through emails amongst the members of the teaching team in order for them to provide feedback and, of course, to pool in ideas and create the necessary context for their students. With regards to the element, the third element in the coaction model, accountability, educators made sure that all team members were present during online synchronous lessons. I am accentuating on the fact that all members were present, because here in Malta we have sometimes we get this misconception where the LSC is only responsible for the education of the child with a statement of needs, which is not the case. The LSC is there to support all the children in the classroom. So even when the child with a statement of needs wasn't present during online lessons, the LSCs joined lessons just the same. Okay, so these teaching teams didn't make a distinction to whether or not the child with a statement of needs was present during online lessons. After each lesson, accountability was further reinforced through self-evaluations between the teaching team. So after the lesson was over, the teaching team used to meet again in order to self-evaluate each lesson, the content of the lesson. Whilst the teacher was also carrying out online lessons, the LSCs were on the alert to ensure the smooth running of lessons, prompting children maybe who got out of their place, who vanished from the screen, etc., etc. So this was the part of accountability which we looked into. With regards to the element of conflict resolution, all team members, all participants acknowledge that conflict is natural when there is more than one individual in a team, of course. But what they outlined was that when this happens, when conflict happens, team members wanted to solve such conflict as quickly as possible, because they believe that when conflicts are resolved, it brings harmony back to the team much more quickly. And of course, conflict resolution tends to also made all the teaching teams reflect on how important it is to tolerate each other in good and in bad times. I mean, it was a stressful situation for everyone. It was an unprecedented situation where today we were physically teaching in the classroom. The next day, we were expected to teach from home remotely. So yes, it was a stressful situation. So the relationship, how it was described by the teaching teams, was that they were able to tolerate each other in good and in bad times. Interestingly enough, although 5 out of the 6 teaching teams told us that more than one LSC wouldn't increase the possibility of conflict within the team, one team believed that more than one LSC in the classroom would actually increase such conflict. So we had both perspectives with regards to conflict within teams. The 5th element within the co-action which we have explored was trust. A culture of trust is very, very crucial between teacher and LSC teams. Participants during the whilst we were carrying out interviews were constantly mentioning terms such as honesty, trust, respect, loyalty. So and this showed how important such elements was between them in order for collaboration to actually take place. Participants planned everything together. This further supports how important trust is. All members felt that they belong. They had space to share their opinions. They all had an equal voice. And at the end of each lesson, most teachers were telling us that they would ask the LSC for feedback because they actually trusted this professional's judgment. So that's the extent to where trust was experienced by these 6 teaching teams. Intrinsic motivation, the 6th element in the co-action model. 5 out of the 6 teaching teams noted how highly motivated they were to source ideas for lesson content which was going to be presented online. They believed that the weakness of each member within the team was overcome by the strength of the other. So, and this further motivated the team, which was really interesting. In fact, for instance, one member of one of the teams told us during the interviews that she had difficulties on how to use Microsoft Teams. Of course, this was a new experience for most of the educators, and how her colleagues were motivated to help her, like calling her up during the weekend saying, did you manage to share your screen? Did you manage to do this? Did you manage to upload some material? And this showed how demonstrated how motivated the teaching teams were. With regards to the 7th element of the co-action model, optimistic approach, a positive atmosphere in such stressful situation was crucial. This stemmed from the fact that all members felt that they belonged within the team. Having a positive atmosphere was important because obviously this was could have affected the climate of the classroom. The optimism of one educator helped the the other overcome some dilemmas. We had a teacher who taught in the early years, who was a bit in a dilemma of how she's going to approach these 5 to 6-year-old children who were usually used to doing hands-on activities in the classroom. And the other members of the team, namely LSCs, were pooling in ideas of how the teacher could go about this. And thus this solved the dilemma. So the optimism of one team member affected maybe the attitude of another.
Claire, just to remind you, you have a few more minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farrugia. The last element of our co-action model, nurturing attitude, stressful situations require being sensitive to the team members' emotional state. We had educators who had people who were vulnerable living with them. We had educators who were vulnerable themselves. We had educators who, like my colleague before mentioned, that they had kids of their own. So each member of the team was empathetic towards the other. It was crucial to show empathy in such circumstances. In fact, there was an LSC who told us that when she was working with a teacher who had a son who needed support during online learning. So whilst the teacher was helping her son, the LSA would take over and carry out the online sessions, online content herself. With regards to recommendations, we felt, Mr. Heathcliff Champion and myself felt that recommendations, it was fair that given that teachers and LSEs were the frontliners in such a remote learning experience, it was fair enough that we would give them the opportunity to provide us with recommendations themselves. So what they recommended for policymakers is to create a common platform for online teaching. In regards to state schools, I think that this has been resolved because Microsoft Teams is now the official means which would be used, which is being used actually. That training is mandatory for educators and parents, not compulsory with regards to MS Teams. To digitize as many resources as possible. One of the difficulties that they encountered was that they had hard copies of books instead of digital content, and that guidelines are issued with regards to the frequency of online lessons, what the expectations of the ministry is, etc., etc. With regards to recommendations to their fellow colleagues, keeping a synchronized mindset would allow educators to work collaboratively and plan, evaluate, and present content in an effective manner. I would like to thank you so much for this opportunity. If there are any questions, I may answer them accordingly.
Thank you, Claire, for a very interesting subject. I have a question and a comment for you.
Yes, please.
One with regarding to your data collection. You spoke about 6 teaching teams.
Yes.
Can you elaborate a bit on how you interviewed them, whether you did it together or separately?
Yes. No, we did it.
Yes.
Okay. Oh,
and
sorry,
let me pause the comment and then you can answer both.
Okay.
And another, it's just a comment about one of the themes you mentioned, or characteristics, actually, the clarity in roles, where you highlighted the fact that the roles, rather than focusing on them being different, they focus a lot on them being complementary. And perhaps you can elaborate a bit on that.
Yes, I may answer the first question. Yes, when teams were recruited, they were interviewed together. Okay. So during 3 interviews, we had 1 teacher and 1 LSC. In the other 3 interviews, we had 1 teacher and 2 LSCs. So yes, we interviewed teaching teams, not teaching individuals.
Excellent. Okay.
It was teams. With regards to the complementary roles?
Yes, the characteristic of clarity in roles. Would you like to elaborate a bit on that?
Clarity in roles. Unfortunately, here in Malta, we have a bit of misconception about the role of the teacher and the boundaries, and the role of the LSE and the boundaries. Yeah. So where should the LSE stop? With regards to how far should she go or should he go in the classroom to support students. But within these teaching teams, I think that the roles were complementary to an extent that the LSC was able to take over with regards to the presentation of the content. So there wasn't any difference of me being a teacher or me being an LSC, because I'm not supposed to, teach a whole class because I am an LSC. Like maybe the teacher would say, I'm not supposed to, support the child with a statement of needs because that is the responsibility of the LSC. But which was not the case. In this regard, the case was that whenever the LSC needed to present content because the teacher was unavailable or because the teacher was actually assessing the students during the lesson, this was done in a natural way, and thus being complementary and having clarity in roles. And clarity in roles means also that both educators, if it is the teacher or the LSC, need to understand that they are responsible for all the responsibility of all the students in the class. You can't have a teacher who would say, I have 15 students plus one with a statement of needs. The teacher has 16 students. Okay. I hope that I have clarified this.
Yes, definitely.
Thank you,
Claire. Thank you. So we have come to the end of the presentations. I hope you enjoyed each one of them. I would like to now invite Dr. Michela Tartonna to share her views, her comments about the presentations, the papers. Dr. Michela Tartonna.
Thank you, Rosiane, and good evening to you all. First of all, I will start by thanking all of you as researchers who provided us with these experiences, the editors of the special issue, the organizers of the seminar, and all the participants who are here with us. I was tasked with giving some concluding comments, and I hope I can rise up to the occasion and that I won't bore you with repetitions, because obviously I'm at the end and you have already listened to most of what I should be saying. The research papers included very rich experiences of academics, primarily those engaged in education and holding the role of educators, across a spectrum of contexts, age groups, using diverse research methods, and a familiarity with a range of theoretical frameworks. This pandemic has marked us in undeniably permanent ways, both individually and also in our personal facets of life, and also collectively. It has put us, educators, at the forefront, and I must say in the role of frontliners, and piled on us heaps of responsibility towards the learning of our students, the engagement of the parents, the promotion of our profession as an accountable and caring one, and also the collaboration with our peers, or all these teams emerged from the research studies that we have just witnessed. This special issue has also revealed the inequalities within our society and globally, as Professor Carmel Borch rightly points out in his keynote speech. We have also learned from these studies that it is not enough to see that online learning is being provided, but also to evaluate its quality. Privilege and intersections of disability, poverty, and gender, amongst others, send a strong message of how we as educators should have social justice as a primary concern and should hold education as a basic and fundamental right. I think if we keep that as one of the takeaways of this seminar, things will start falling into place. If we remember that education is everybody's entitlement, then we can bring all the efforts together. I think I would be doing a huge injustice if I had to try and summarize each intervention that we were presented with today. I do not even think that this is what is being expected of me. So I will just share with you what struck me the most from each paper in a weak attempt to revisit these experiences, and hoping that this may help you gather your thoughts at the end of this rich discussion. I will go through them in a chronological order in the way that they were presented. So if we start from the first paper, Teachers' Response to Online Learning During COVID-19 Pandemic, by Lennart and Rosiane. If I may, I'm going to refer to all of you on a first name basis. I think what really came out from this paper was that We learned how teachers have used web platforms before the pandemic and during the pandemic, particularly during the first part between March and June. It was a desperate situation, and this necessitated the collaboration of school leaders, of teachers, of students, of those leading the educational institutions, and also the whole families that were involved. We could see very different ways of how schools managed the situation and how schools understood online learning and online instruction to be like. And it was also emphasized how strong our union presence in Malta is, and how this union presence impacted on how the directions were being issued, and how school leaders and teachers were asked to engage in online learning. If we then go to the second paper by Jane, assessing the usefulness of outdoor learning in the early years during the COVID-19 pandemic in Malta, we learn of how important outdoor space is and how educators can maximize on the use of outdoor space, particularly in early childhood classes. We learn of the impact that school closures had on children, and how they could benefit when school children meet physically and engage on a face-to-face level. Online learning can amplify the inequalities among children. This is something which was featuring in most of the research papers being presented. And it can also impact on mental health issues, particularly in situations when these were present already. This comes as no surprise, the conclusions of this paper, but I would like to emphasize them, the benefits of children spending time outdoors in nature. I know how much Jane is proactive and loves sending this message of the benefits of nature and outdoor space, and it is very important, particularly in Malta, where these spaces are very limited, that we take care of them and make the best use of them. Then if we have to turn to the third paper presented, the benefits of participating in virtual learning spaces for adults overcoming isolation during COVID-19 by Rosa, Anna, and Sarah. This was interesting because it dealt with the experience of adult learners and their isolation. We often refer to the elderly generation as suffering from isolation, and yet we find out from this study and other studies how adult learners, especially those who were confined to their homes, were also carrying the brunt of this lockdown, and how online learning opportunities contributed not just to their learning experiences per se, but also to combat their loneliness. The negative impacts of isolation were emphasized in this research study, and something positive which came out of it was that the online participation brought people closer together. This is something which I would really like to focus upon when reading this paper, because we often complain of how technology can wear us out and detach us from people, from society, from other human beings. But in this case, we have a very positive experience which came out. So it was a very positive story of a group of learners who found support, who connected with their peers and with their teachers. Then there was Doreen's research study about formative assessment during online teaching and learning during the pandemic. And something which got me thinking was, and Doreen referred to it, was the tension that she herself experienced between her role as a researcher and her involvement with the training provision of formative assessment, or her past experiences with this training provision. And this really struck me, because in Malta we often wear multiple hats because of the context being so small, and we often find ourselves in these kind of scenarios where we have to make research, collect data, and then at the same time people are seeing us in other roles. It's important. Doreen was very cautious when she was speaking of formative assessment, and I think this is something which we should all consider, because we usually make a lot of sweeping statements about assessment in schools. But what can transpire from this study was that formative assessment can lead to effective teaching, and teachers can use this opportunity, besides other opportunities, to be proactive about their practices. Then comes the Scottish study by Kerry, Daniela, and Duncan, and this is about the philosophy of caring. Something which was really interesting is the way they deconstructed the meaning of care. Maybe Duncan had a lot to do with this part of the paper because of his philosophical background, but they really explained it in very coherent in a very coherent manner, that care has to be relational. It is basically an encounter and between humans, and how crucial it has become during this pandemic. It has been a complex situation for all of us. It still is, because the situation is still evolving. And something which is very positive is that because of this pandemic, because of COVID, we have come up with new possibilities of how to care. What I really like, even in the way we are communicating in emails, rather than just saying regards, we write keep safe or take care of yourself, take care of your loved ones. I really engage with that caring element that we have transmitted to each other. The next paper is by a group of researchers presented by Charmaine. They are all my colleagues in the primary department. It was very interesting because they all happen to be female. I don't think this was incidental at all. I think it was the gender aspect was intentional here. And they were 8 personal narratives about their identity as researchers, their professional identity, and their need to collaborate and to trust each other. I related a lot to this because as an academic, I find it necessary. I find it as a personal need that I have to engage with my colleagues, and it is the only one of the few ways which can make my role truly relevant and fulfilling. When I am collaborating with others, I am developing experiences with others. I truly believe that we are social animals, and it is important that we look for these opportunities where we can trust and engage with each other. As Charmaine and these group of researchers told us, it is an opportunity where we can broaden our experiences and we can reconstruct our professional identities. And then the last paper presented by Claire and written by Heathcliff and Claire, a coaction model to explore remote teacher and learning support educator collaboration during COVID-19 school closure in Malta. First of all, I think well done, kudos to these 2 researchers for coming up with this term, coaction, which is basically an acronym, but it makes a lot of sense even on its own. It's also a very interesting study because we do not usually read about research between teachers and LSCs on how they collaborate, especially during the pandemic, because it took some time for us educators to to develop channels of communication between ourselves. So it was really good that they found this opportunity to do research with these teams of educators. I think it was a very honest piece of research. There were elements of conflict which came out, but also a culture of trust, something that is always appreciated when we see it happening in schools and between educators. I can also link this with the Scottish study because there were many episodes of empathy, which were exhibited, and it was also very encouraging to see that the participants came up themselves with the recommendations for the policymakers and for their colleagues. Usually, as researchers, we often fall into the temptation of coming with these recommendations ourselves. So it was good that this opportunity was given to the participants. As a closing comment, please allow me to express my gratitude for this opportunity to listen to and to engage with these researchers on a direct and intimate level. It is indeed a privilege for me to form part of this academic community, many of whom I know personally and I collaborate with. They presented us with robust research, which they managed to carry out in this crazy time, which is constantly evolving, and to publish it in a coherent manner in a way which helped the rest of us understand what is happening in schools and in learning environments. It also helped us to relate to their experiences, sometimes also to compare such experiences with our own. This helps us identify better with our own context and to distinguish what makes us the same and what makes us different. One would think that a special issue about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on education would transmit a narrative of doom and gloom. On the contrary, all these studies manifest a message of hope, of opportunities, and of unprecedented collaboration. That's all from my end.
Thank you, Dr. Michelle Tartonna, dear friend, colleague, and also Deputy Dean of our faculty. And with that last comment of hope and the message of hope, I would like to thank you all, presenters, authors, editors, audience, for being here. And I hope you take something with you from this session. We wish you a good evening. Thank you.